Committee will come to order. Last week, the committee held classified and unclassified sessions on the state of the world, or more accurately, the state of the world environment in which the American military must operate and U.S. national security must be protected. I was struck by the essential point General Petraeus made that we face many threats and can overcome any of them, except perhaps what we do to ourselves. Today, we turn to the state of the U.S. military. I continue to be concerned and sometimes even disturbed by evidence that is accumulating on the damage inflicted upon our military in recent years and the stresses our forces are under. That damage comes from a variety of factors, including budget cuts of 20%, continuing resolutions, the failure to recognize or at least admit and then address mounting readiness problems, as well as the shrinking size of the force while keeping the tempo of operations high. There is certainly plenty of blame to go around between both parties and both the executive and legislative branches for the state of affairs. But now, with a new administration and a new Congress, we have an opportunity to begin the repairs. To do that, we need a clear understanding of the state of our military and the immediate trends that challenge us. For that, we turn to the vice chiefs of each of our services, and we ask that each of you provide this committee your best professional military judgment in answering the questions we pose. As was emphasized last week, the world situation is dangerous and complex. This is no time to exaggerate or to underplay the challenges before us. Only by facing them squarely can we meet the obligation all of us have to the Constitution, to the men and women who serve, and to the American public. I would now yield to the distinguished acting ranking member, the gentleman from Tennessee, for any comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask unanimous consent that the opening statement of the real ranking member, Mr. Smith, be inserted in the record.
With objection.
And speaking on my own behalf, I think we all realize that few subjects are more important for the future of the nation than the readiness of our military forces. And I hope that we all know that few things are more detrimental to that readiness than sequestration. So I share the Chairman's hope, and I'm not ready to be optimistic yet, but I hope that we can deal with sequestration this year and end it permanently. So it's going to be up to the folks on this committee, the Justice Committee and the House of Representatives, to make sure that our impact is felt in ending sequestration. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to the testimony of witnesses.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to welcome each of our witnesses today and also to express, I know, the committee's appreciation for your service in this job and for each of your service to the country. Without objection, your complete written statements will be made part of the record. And let me just briefly introduce General Daniel Allyn, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, Admiral William Moran, Vice Chief of Naval Operations, General Stephen Wilson, Vice Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and General Glenn Walters, Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. Again, thank you all for being here. We would be interested in any opening comments each of you would like to make. We'll start with you, General Allyn.
Thank you, Chair Thornberry and Congressman Cooper, distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the state of your United States Army. I appreciate your support and demonstrated commitment to our soldiers, Army civilians, families, and veterans, and look forward to discussing the strength of our Army with you today. This is a challenging time for our nation, and certainly for our Army. The unipolar moment is over, and placing it is a multipolar world characterized by competition and uncertainty. Today, the Army is globally engaged with more than 182,000 soldiers supporting combatant commanders in over 140 worldwide locations. My recent travel, I've visited our soldiers in 15 countries since Veterans Day, reinforces that the Army is not about programs. It's all about people. Our people executing security missions all around the globe. The strength of the all-volunteer force truly remains our soldiers. These young men and women are trained, ready, and inspired, and we must be similarly inspired to provide that for them commensurate with their extraordinary service and sacrifice. To meet the demands of today's unstable global security environment and maintain the trust placed in us by the American people, the Army requires sustained, long-term, and predictable funding. Absent additional legislation, the caps set by the Budget Control Act of 2011 will return in FY18, forcing the Army to once again draw down our end strength, reduce funding for readiness, and increase the risk of sending undertrained and poorly equipped soldiers into harm's way, a preventable risk our nation must not accept. We thank all of you for recognizing that plans to reduce the Army to 980,000 soldiers would threaten our national security, and we appreciate all your work to stem the drawdown. Nevertheless, the most important actions you can take, steps that will have both positive and lasting impact, will be to immediately repeal the 2011 Budget Control Act and ensure sufficient funding to train, man, and equip the FY17 NDAA authorized force. Unless this is done, additional top-line and OCO funding, though nice in the short term, will prove unsustainable, rendering all your hard work for naught. In this uncertain environment, readiness remains our #1 priority. Sufficient and consistent funding is essential to build and sustain current readiness, to progress towards a more modern, capable force sized to reduce risk for contingencies, and to recruit and train the best talent within our ranks. Readiness remains paramount because the Army does not have the luxury of taking a day off. We must stand ready at a moment's notice to defend the United States and its interests. With your assistance, the Army will continue to resource the best trained, best equipped, and best led fighting force in the world. We thank you for the steadfast support of our outstanding men and women in uniform. Please accept my written testimony for the record. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Admiral.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the member of the committee. It's a privilege to be here with my fellow vice chiefs to talk about the readiness of our military. It's easiest for me to talk to you in terms of simple supply and demand. As many of you know, the ongoing demand for naval forces far exceeds our long-term supply, and that need continues to grow with no end in sight. Supply is best summed up in one fact. Your Navy today is the smallest it's been in 99 years. That said, we are where we are, which makes it urgent to adequately fund, fix, and maintain the fleet that we do have. And by the way, we have never been busier. A quick snapshot around the globe and you'll see the Navy is the nation's primary deterrence policy in places like the Arabian, Mediterranean, and South China Seas. Over the past 5 or 6 years, this call for deterrence to be ready to take action has grown, principally because of the aggressive growth from expanding naval competitors like Russia and China. And when you add threats from Iran, North Korea, ISIS, and others, it's a very, very busy time for your Navy. Our sailors have always risen to the occasion, answering the call no matter the circumstances and no matter the resources, providing food, water, and medical assistance in Haiti, to striking hostile sites in Yemen, to Navy SEALs taking down terrorist leaders. We're getting it done because that's who we are, and that's what makes us the best Navy in the world. But the unrelenting pace, inadequate resources, and small size are taking their toll. Our testimony today may seem like a broken record. Our Navy faces increased demand without the size and resources required to properly maintain and train for our future. And every year we've had to make tough choices, often choosing to sacrifice long-term readiness to make sure we better be ready to answer the call today. We are, in fact, putting our first team on the field, but we lack serious depth on the bench. This didn't happen overnight. Readiness declines tend to be insidious. From year to year, we've all learned to live with less and less. We have certainly learned to execute our budget inefficiently with 9 consecutive continuing resolutions. But this has forced us to repeatedly take money from cash accounts that are the lifeblood of building long-term readiness in our Navy. It's money for young lieutenants to fly high and fast and who need air under their seats to perfect their skills in the future. It's money for spare parts sailors can fix the gear that they have. It's money for sailors to operate at sea in all kinds of conditions to build instincts that create the best warfighters in the world. With your help, we have the opportunity to change this. It starts by strengthening our foundation. Let's ensure that ships and aircraft that we do have are maintained and modernized so they provide the full measure of combat power. Then let's fill in the holes by eliminating the inventory shortfalls in ships, submarines, and aircraft throughout the fleet. And together, by taking these steps, we can achieve the ultimate goal of sizing the Navy to meet the strategic demands of this dynamic and changing world. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
General Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, Congressman Cooper, distinguished members of the committee. On behalf of the Secretary of the Air Force and our Chief of Staff, it's an honor to be with you today and to with my fellow Vice Chiefs to talk to you about the state of our Air Force and readiness. Your American Airmen are proud to be part of the most powerful joint force warfighting team in its history. Together, we provide leaders with a broad range of options, protect our country and its interests, both home and abroad. For the past 70 years, responsive, flexible, and agile American air power has been our nation's first and most sustainable solution in both crisis and conflict, underwriting every other instrument of power. We provide the nation with unrelenting global vigilance, global reach, and global power. In short, your Air Force is always in demand and always there. Look no further than 2 weeks ago when your Air Force executed a precision strike in Sirte, Libya, killing over 100 violent extremists. This is a textbook trans-regional, multi-domain, multi-function mission. Air Force space, cyber, and ISR warriors provided precision navigation and timing while monitoring enemy communication and movement. Simultaneously, 2 B-2 bombers took off from Missouri, flew 17 hours one way, refueled with numerous tankers, and teamed with 2 MQ-9s to employ precision munitions within 10 seconds of their designated time over target. They then flew another 17 hours home and landed safely back in the United States. Meanwhile, airmen operate 60 persistent, remotely piloted aircraft patrols, 24/7, 365. They're the blinking eye for combatant commanders. They remotely fly missions from the continental United States, teamed with nearly 20,000 forward deployed airmen to support operations like the recent events in Raqqa and Mosul, where our RPA fighters and bombers have conducted 92% of the strikes against ISIS. We did this while simultaneously ensuring 2/3 of our nuclear triad and 75% of our nuclear command and control remain robust, reliable, flexible, and survivable options for the nations. In the allotted time of this hearing, an average of 65 mobility aircraft will take off, 430,000 cyber connections will be blocked, 5 homeland defense missions will fly, and 3 strikes against ISIS will occur. Each of these actions are enabled by airmen providing space-based position, navigation, and timing and communication for our military, while also providing GPS capability to the world's 3 billion users. The capabilities of our airmen to provide to our nation and our allies have never been more vital, and the global demand for American air power will only grow in the future. American airmen remain professional, innovative, dedicated, and quite frankly, the envy of the world. However, we are out of balance. The demand for our mission and our people exceed the supply. 26 years of continuous combat has limited our ability to prepare for the future against advanced future threats, scenarios with the lowest margin of error and the highest risk to national security. This nonstop combat, paired with the budget instability and lower than planned top lines, has made the United States Air Force the smallest, oldest equipped, and least ready in our history. We've attempted to balance risk across the force to maintain readiness, but have been forced to make unacceptable trades between readiness, force structure, and modernization. Today's global challenges require an Air Force ready not only to defeat violent extremism, but an Air Force prepared and modernized for any threat the nation may face. Mr. Chairman, I'll close by quoting General Douglas MacArthur. He sent the following cable as he escaped the Philippines in 1942. He said, "The history of failure in war can be summed up in 2 words. Too late. Too late in comprehending the deadly purpose of a potential enemy. Too late in realizing the moral danger. Too late in preparedness." Distinguished members of the committee, preparedness or readiness cannot be overlooked. Your Air Force needs congressional support to repeal the Budget Control Act and provide stable, predictable funding. It's critical to rebuilding our military's full-spectrum readiness, which is the #1 priority for the Secretary of Defense. We need to act now, before it's too late. On behalf of the Chief of Staff and Secretary of the Air Force and the 660,000 active Guard, Reserve, and civilian airmen who serve our nation, thank you for your tireless support for us. I look for your questions.
General Walters.
And distinguished members of the House Armed Services Committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and report on the readiness of your Marine Corps. The Marine Corps remains dedicated to our essential role as our nation's naval expeditionary force in readiness. During 15 years of conflict, we focused investment on ensuring Marines were prepared for the fight, and they were. Today, our operational tempo remains as high as it was during the peak of our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Our continued focus on deployed unit readiness combined with fiscal uncertainty and funding reductions leave your Marine Corps facing substantial readiness challenges. Your Marine Corps is insufficiently manned, trained, and equipped across the depth of force to operate in an ever-evolving operational environment. Due to years of fiscal constraints, the Marine Corps is fundamentally optimized for the past and has sacrificed modernization and infrastructure to sustain our current readiness posture. In addition to the increased resources for operations and maintenance needed to improve current readiness across the entirety of our Marine Corps, we require your support in 3 key areas to regain the readiness levels our nation requires of us. Over the past 18 months, we have identified various end strengths and associated capabilities and modernization required to operate in the threat environment characterized by complex terrain, information warfare, electromagnetic signatures, and contested maritime domain. We need to increase our active component end strength. We are confident that an increase of 3,000 Marines per year maintains a rate of growth consistent with the effective recruiting and accession while maintaining our high standards. Bases, stations, and installations of the platforms where we train and generate our readiness. The continued underfunding of facilities, sustainment, restoration, and modernization and military construction continues to cause progressive degradation of our infrastructure and creates increased long-term cost. We have a backlog of over $9 billion in deferred maintenance for our infrastructure. We require up-to-date training systems, ranges, and facilities support the fielding of new equipment and simulation systems that facilitate improved training in standards and readiness. Supporting the joint force requirements of the past 15 years consumed much of the useful life of our legacy systems, and fiscal uncertainty induced defense spending for significant delays in our modernization efforts. There is significant cost associated with maintaining and sustaining any legacy system without a proportional capability increase associated with that investment. As we continue to spend limited fiscal resources to sustain legacy systems developed for threats of 20 years ago, we risk slowly losing our competitive advantage against potential adversaries. We need to modernize our ground tactical vehicle and aircraft fleet soonest. Accelerating the investment in amphibious ships is necessary to reach our wartime requirement. If forced to continue to pursue the path of investing in legacy systems and modernizing our force, we will find our Marine Corps optimized for the past and increasingly at risk to deter and defeat our potential adversaries. On behalf of all of your Marines, sailors, and their families and civilians that support their service, we thank Congress and this committee for the opportunity to discuss the key challenges your Marine Corps faces. While much work needs to be done, the authorizations within, coupled with sufficient funding and the repeal of the Budget Control Act, will put us on a path to rebuild and sustain our Marine Corps for the 21st century. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I want to briefly touch on some of the facts, largely in y'all's written testimony, but also some press report, and I'll just go down the line. General Allyn, you in your written testimony, it says only about 1/3 of the brigade combat teams and 1/4 of our combat aviation brigades and half of our division headquarters are ready. And then you say only 3 brigade combat teams could be called upon to fight tonight in the event of a crisis. Now, I think we have 58, right, brigade combat teams, and your testimony is that only 3 of them could be called upon to fight tonight. Is that right?
That's accurate, Chairman, and it reflects a the realities of both the op tempo and the recurring demand that our forces face. When we say fight tonight, that means that unit needs no additional people, no additional training, and no additional equipment. And 3 is where we're at today. And those that we say are ready, the 1/3, it's actually just higher than that, of our forces that are ready require somewhere in the range of 30 days to ensure that they have everything they need to meet the demands of immediate combat.
Well, you kind of hope an enemy will be accommodating and give us the 30 days so that we can be ready. You then go on the next page talking about equipment and say, today we are outranged, outgunned, and outdated. And then in your testimony you also say, so if you put all this together, the Army can only accomplish defense planning guidance requirements at high military risk. Now, General Milley kind of talked about this, but explain what that means to us. My layman's ears seem to hear we can only do what the country asks us to do with a pretty darn good chance that we won't be successful. Am I right?
Chairman, basically what it comes down to is the term that you heard General Wilson use from General MacArthur. We will be too late to need. Our soldiers will arrive too late. Our units will require too much time to close the equipping and manning and training gaps. And as you highlighted, hope is not a method, and we cannot count on the enemy providing us that window of opportunity to close those gaps. The end result is excessive casualties, both to innocent civilians and to our forces that are already forward stationed to close the rest of the force required to accomplish the mission.
Admiral, I had several things I want to ask you about. You mentioned the Navy is smaller than it has been in the last 99 years. But I want to ask you about a story that came out yesterday that you don't mention in your testimony that says, according to the Navy, 53% of all Navy aircraft cannot fly. And that is about twice the historic norm. If you go to F-18, 62% are out of service, 27% in major depot work, and 35% simply awaiting maintenance or parts. This is a press story from yesterday in Defense News. Are those statistics accurate?
Yes, sir, they are.
It's a little hard for me to know what question to ask next. 53% of all Navy aircraft can't fly. 62% of our strike F-18s can't fly today. That's our status.
Yes, sir. When it comes to the strike fighter community, that's our Legacy Hornets, A through D, and our Super Hornets, E and F versions. Our Legacy Hornets, which we in the Marine Corps operate today, are well beyond their design life, let alone their service life. They were designed for 6,000 hours. We're extending the life on those Hornets into the 8,000 to 9,000 hour range. They're been around as long as General Walters and I have been serving, for the most part. So they're pretty old. It takes about twice the amount of man hours to fix one of those jets as it was designed to take, which gives you a pretty good indication how old they are. And capacity in our depots has been diminished since sequestration and furlough back in 2013, and we're trying to rebuild that capacity today to try to get those jets turned around. So on a typical day in the Navy, about 25 to 30% of our jets and our airplanes are in some kind of depot maintenance, which does not allow them to fly. So your statistics of twice that amount or 2/3 today is a reflection of how hard we've flown these jets over the last 15 years. And the fact that we have not recapped those jets, in other words, we haven't built new, or we've not bought enough new ones to replace them. And we've been waiting for quite some time for the F-35 to deliver, which we were counting on 7, 8 years ago to start filling in those holes. All of that adds up to the numbers you reflected.
Well, it is true, is it not, that a fair number of the strikes against Al-Qaeda and ISIS over the years have been carried out by these Navy jets?
Yes, sir. We put ready airplanes and ready crews forward on deployment.
Yeah.
As I reflected in my opening statement, there's no depth on the bench to go behind them, though, if we had the surge forces. I think it's consistent with what General Allyn just described in the Army.
Yeah.
We will be late to get there if we want to have full-up equipment to get a fight in the future.
And turning to the Air Force, General Wilson, you testified in your written statement, and I think said this, the smallest and oldest Air Force we've ever had. Average aircraft age is 27 years old today. But you go on and talk about the pilot shortage, where at the end of fiscal year 16, we were 1,555 total pilots short and 3,400 aircraft maintainers short. What I'm struck by is we have we're short 1,500 pilots, 3,400 maintainers in the smallest Air Force we've ever had. Certainly that translates, does not, into less military capability.
Chairman, that's exactly right. As a context, in 1981, we went to Desert Storm. Air Force was 500,000 people and 134 fighter squadrons. Today, we find ourselves at 317,000 total force, 317,000 in our active force with 50 fighter squadrons. You mentioned the pilot shortage. Of the numbers, we have 723 short in our fighter pilot. We don't have a problem bringing people into the Air Force. We're doing our best to retain people, but when you're flying old equipment, 27 years old as an average, and you're short of maintainers to fix those airplanes, and to talk to the Vice Chief as CNO, you talked about depots. As they break into depots and they find things that they've never found before, and it takes craftsmen and artisans to fix those airplanes, and it takes longer, we're flying less. Again, as a matter of context, at the very bottom, in the late 70s of what we called the hollow force, fighter pilots were flying about 15 sorties a month, about 20 hours. Today, we're flying less hours and less sorties than we were in the late 70s. Now, didn't get there overnight in the 70s, and we found a way out of that. There's a way out of this. The way out of this starts first with manpower. We need more manpower to be able to plus up our force. We need to get the right training. With the right training, we can bring in the right weapon system support. With the weapon system support, we can increase the flying hours. With the flying hours, we reduce the ops tempo, and we need time. And over time, we'll increase our readiness. But we think it'll take 6 to 8 years to bring our readiness level back where it needs to be. But it starts first with people.
6 to 8 years under favorable scenario, I assume.
Yes,
Yes.
Chairman. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to toot our own horn, but thank goodness we tried to stop the shrinkage of end strength in last year's NDAA. We hadn't fixed anything, but hopefully we kept it from getting worse. Finally, Marine Corps, General Walters, one of the things just stuck out to me in your testimony was the statement that flight hour averages per crew per month are below the minimum standards required to achieve and maintain adequate flight time and training and readiness levels. So it's similar, I guess, to what General Wilson just said. We are flying less now than we have even in the hollow force of the 70s, or that was what he said. You say below the minimum standards to achieve and maintain flight time, training, and readiness levels. My question to you, what are the consequences of that? What does it mean if you can't even meet the minimum level of flight hours?
Thank you for the question, Chairman, and thank you to this committee for trying us back on our RBA recovery in the last 2 years. We have made some improvement. To your question about flying hours and what it means, each type model series has a minimum requirement. It's important to understand what that minimum requirement is, and it's somewhere between 16 and 18 hours per pilot per month. There's an outlier on C-130s, which is about 23 hours. And what that does is keeps them current in their current capabilities. It does not guarantee that they'll be proficient or they'll be the A-team to defeat an enemy in a near-peer fight. If you're looking for a number, the last time I saw us that good was when the pilots were getting about 25 hours per month. And that would make them current and proficient. What it really means in the end is that we're sending a lot of these, we will send in a major combat operation, we'll send a lot of pilots that don't have adequate training, and there's historical example after historical example when flight time required is not produced, and the results in an air fight, both air to ground and air to air.
Okay, so you said 16 to 18 hours per month is the minimum.
That's the minimum, and what we're getting now is between 12 and 14. So that's the minimum to maintain your currency. But currency is not nirvana for a war fight. Proficient pilots is what we're aimed for, and that's across every capability we have. There are certain tasks that you have to do them once, but doing them multiple reps and sets is what makes a world-class military organization.
You might say it's kind of like getting ready to play in the Super Bowl but not being able to practice.
That's a very good analogy, sir.
Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank each of the vice chiefs for their excellent testimony. Each one of you has revealed critical gaps in our readiness, and I hope that all the members of this committee are listening closely. I want to focus particularly on what this committee and Congress can do to solve some of these problems, because I think you gentlemen have highlighted the problems very well. General Allyn said it in plain English, and let me foot stomp his testimony. I'm going to quote here. The most important actions you can take, steps that will have both positive and lasting impact, will be to immediately repeal the 2011 Budget Control Act and ensure sufficient funding to train, man, and equip the FY17 NDAA authorized force. Let me emphasize again, immediately repeal the 2011 Budget Control Act. The General goes on to say, unless this is done, additional top-line and OCO funding, something that Congress has traditionally done, though nice in the short term, will prove unsustainable, rendering all your hard work for naught. Could there be a clearer, more dire warning to this committee? So I thank you, General, for offering that clear-cut, plain English testimony. It's not your problem, it's our problem. Another of the witnesses emphasized that we've had 9 consecutive continuing resolutions. How can anyone, even the ablest manager in the world, manage that? 9 consecutive ones. So my main message today is for the newer members of our committee who perhaps have learned all the bad habits that some of the older members of the committee have unfortunately gotten used to. This is the chance for a new day, a new approach, to have a stronger military that is more ready for all the threats we face. And this is one of the most bipartisan committees in Congress. It should be. These are issues we should all be able to agree on. Managing our affairs responsibly. Because another way to put this is, the worst enemy we face is ourselves. Our BCA Act of 2011 probably poses a greater threat to our military than any foreign adversary. So why do we hurt ourselves? There is no good reason for this, and General Allyn said it better than I could possibly say it. If you would like to elaborate, General Allyn, you're welcome to. Again, the problem is ours. It's not yours. We should solve this sequestration problem.
Well, I know, to reinforce your point, I was in operational force when the BCA took effect and caused us to cancel 7 combat training center rotations. And that is a generation of leaders that can never get that experience back. And we cannot go back there. We cannot do that to ourselves again. And it is, for most of our services, we are still climbing out of that abyss of the BCA impact when it was impacted mid-year. My belief is if we can do away with BCA, if we can fund our services to the authorized end strength in this budget year and the next, you will do more good for the sustained readiness build of our services than you can begin to imagine.
Thank you, General. Let me end by just saying all members of this committee should be asking the leadership and respective parties why we can't repeal BCA now, as the General suggests. You'll get all sorts of excuses, all sorts of half reasons, but none of them are good enough. Now's the time to take action on this, and any delay is inexcusable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
At the end of last week's hearing, there were 3 members who set the hearing but still did not get a chance to ask questions. So I promised them they could go first today, and then we will go back to regular order as we usually do. First up is gentleman from Mississippi, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I just want to say to the panel, you guys are warriors and heroes, not only in our eyes, but in the eyes of all Americans. I know that truly you put the interests of this nation first, and I thank you for that. That being said, I read your testimony, and I noticed you use a lot of military jargon, and I understand all the Army stuff. I don't necessarily, and much of the Marine stuff, but I understand the Air and the Naval. So today, you know, a lot of people are watching this on Fox News, other places, so ask as much as you can, speak like a civilian or speak like someone who is not in the military, because acronyms have a tendency of them not understanding what it is. First, I want to start with the Air, something I'm unfamiliar with, General Wilson, or as much as I should, but I have Columbus Air Force Base, the home of the 14th Flying Training Wing, and it's located in my district. And these men and women train on all of our platforms in the Air Force are trained right there in Columbus, Mississippi. Flies more sorties than anywhere else in the world, to my knowledge, right on Columbus Air Force Base. But I'm concerned when they leave Columbus Air Force Base that they aren't getting hours on the platform, not the trainer, but on the actual platform that they're going to be trying to fly the adequate number of hours to be ready and to make sure that we save lives, because that's what it comes down to when they're not trained, is saving lives, because an unprepared pilot can't do the job. Tell me how many hours we're getting today and how it impacts your readiness to our mission on the battlefield.
Yeah, Congressman, thanks for the question. And as you know, as we talked before, I commanded 14th Flying Training Wing at Columbus. It is the busiest Air Force base in our Air Force. Flies more sorties than anybody. Does a fantastic job producing pilots for Air Force. And today's pilots, we're not flying enough. We're not flying enough hours or sorties. So as I mentioned earlier, today's combat fighter pilots are flying less hours and less sorties than they were flying in the late 70s. They're averaging about 10 sorties a month and about 14 hours a month. And that's too few for the missions that we need to be able to fly. Today, as we talk about high-end readiness, we need to be prepared to fight any adversary. Our adversaries around the globe have been looking at how we fight, and they're training and modernizing their forces. They have sufficient capability of fighter airplanes like ours, and are also developing what we call fifth-generation stealth-type fighters, both in China and Russia. They've watched how we're fighting, and they're preparing their forces. We need to be prepared to fight any adversary. We're extremely good today and are ready to fight in the Middle East against violent extremists. But we need to be ready to fight against any adversary. So we need more flying hours, but to get flying hours, we need more people. Today, our Air Force, we bottomed at 311,000 people. Thanks to your help, we're up to 317 at the end of this last fiscal year. We want to grow to 321,000 people here in the next coming year. If we do that, that brings us to about 90% manning. But as anybody knows, 90% manning, effective manning, because you always have people that are deployed or can't do the job or in training, leaves you about 75% effective manning. We think we need to grow the Air Force.
Let me stop, because I have another question that I really want to get to. Because when we talk about BCTs, or we talk about MEWs, or we talk about fighter wings, or number of ships or carrier groups, those things are important. And I think a lot of America doesn't understand. We're rotating fresh equipment out of units to make combat-ready units, and that by doing that, it decreases the readiness of future deployments. So have you guys in writing, I would ask that each of you, let me know how many BCTs you need and what the personnel in strength that the Army needs, and not only that, but the number of new M1 systems, so that we're not rotating equipment. They used to wouldn't let us hot in the Army when I was in there, General Allyn. They wanted a crew on his tank because you get a familiarity with that piece of equipment, and we're having to hotbed everything that we have in the military today. Hotbed means a crew uses another crew's equipment because it's newer and up to date. So do you guys have an idea what your in strength you think we need to be ready to meet today's missions, and also the number of equipment, both in modernization and just replacing the other stuff? And if you could address that, and I'll start with you on General Walters.
Yes, sir. The number of Marines we need, in my written statement, I said I think we need a minimum of 194. But it's also interesting, you hit on the point. So why are we hot racking the equipment? Why are we moving equipment around? Because for 10 years, we have modernization programs in place to replace our old equipment, but they're delivering over a 30-year time frame and buying them at a minimum level. The example for us, the example is we have a 40-year-old amphibious vehicle, and we're putting a survivability upgrade on it on a third of them because we won't deliver the other ones, the new ones. JLTV have all kinds of needs for light tactical vehicles that have been around for 20 years, but we're buying the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle at a very shallow rate. It'll take us 20 years to get there. And probably the post child for us is I have a light armored vehicle that's 34 years old, and because of the fiscal constraints we've been under, we never even thought about replacing it. So we have an obsolescence program on there. It's not the best use of our money, and the Marines deserve new equipment for the threat.
Chairman, I thank you, but just to mention, OCO does not allow them to modernize like top-line funding, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. And if others of you would like to respond in writing to Mr. Kelly's question, that's great. We got to stay reasonably on time, as Mr. Cooper said. We've got lots of folks on this committee. Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, and thank you to all our witnesses, and in particular, thank you for your service to our country. As a former Marine, I'm very honored to be able to be part of this committee and to address you today. It is quite clear from your testimonies today and from our previous hearings that our military faces incredibly diverse threats, some of which are well prepared for, and some which remain to be a work in progress. There is no question we must continue to maintain a strong military force, and Congress must do its part to provide the necessary resources to ensure readiness. However, as all of you will probably agree, sequestration is not the answer. It will neither balance our budgets nor improve our military readiness. Many, if not all of you, have indicated that number one risk readiness is sequestration. I believe the question we must ask ourselves is, what are we trying to protect? We continue to impose arbitrary cuts to our country's education and health systems and not take steps to protect our environment. I believe we will be left with a hollow nation with nothing more for the most superior armed forces to protect. I believe in order to develop an effective strategy, we must decide what our desired end state is for each of the threats and priorities our military leaders identify, and then look at what resources are needed to meet these desired goals. Better oversight and accountability systems must be put in place to ensure not only an effective but an efficient military. I believe it is a disservice to the American people for Congress to be funding cost overruns. To this end, my question to all of you is, what steps has each service taken in order to increase oversight and accountability to its various programs and operations in order to eliminate wasteful spending? Can you provide us some examples of savings your service has identified? And I say this because it's no surprise to you that on occasion, there are many articles in the media that identify this wasteful spending. And we have so many priorities that we are being asked to consider. I'd like to hear from each one of you if possible.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and thank you for your service. Semper Fidelis. We love the United States Marine Corps, too, even the United States Army, so we appreciate your service. I would first highlight the fact you spoke of two significant challenges. First of all, the threats that we face in this uncertain environment that we operate, and the savings that we must continue to be pursuing as good stewards of the resources that you, the Congress, provide to us. On the first piece, the other significant challenge to us, in addition to sequestration, is continuing resolutions. Continuing resolutions deny us the opportunity to implement new programs, right, like the ability to upgrade our opposing force capability at our combat training centers as we identify capabilities our adversaries are using that we are likely to face. We must train against those. We must upgrade our capability to do that. We cannot do that under continuing resolution conditions. So we would also appreciate the passage of an appropriations bill, obviously, in the very near future. In terms of savings, a couple of critical initiatives the United States Army is underway with to continue to be good stewards of the resources that you provide. We have a strategic portfolio review process that looks at all of our acquisition programs across all domains and identifies the highest priority programs, ensures that we're moving money away from those that are less important and funding those that we must deliver as fast as possible to ensure that we can equip our forces in the future. The second thing is to ensure we achieve auditability, which is a critical requirement that we must deliver to the nation. That is well underway. We have made progress year over year. We estimate we will probably still have work to do at the end of this year to get to full auditability, but we are progressing as rapidly as we can. One of the programs that allows us to do that is our GFEBS software program that enables us to see ourselves accurately across all our funding systems. We need to upgrade that program based on findings of prior year audits. We cannot do that in a continuing resolution environment. So again, a couple of points to your very accurate questions.
And I hope the gentleman will work with us on our acquisition reform efforts of the last 2 years, and they will continue. Mr. Khanna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your graciousness in allowing junior members to participate, and you're offering this opportunity. Thank you to the witnesses for your extraordinary service to our nation and the extraordinary sacrifice you have each made. My question concerns cybersecurity. One of the things that I often hear from companies is the burden that they actually have to have cybersecurity. And you never would expect our companies to have private defense forces against conventional attacks, but a large portion of their budgets are going to defend against cyber attacks. And we know that there are about 240,000 cybersecurity jobs that are unfilled because folks don't have the skills. Many people in the private sector will say the best folks are those who have been trained either by the military or the government, and there are just not enough of them for them to come into the private sector. So my question for all the branches, and I don't know whichever one is most relevant, is what can we in Congress do to help you better prepare in training folks equipped in cybersecurity? What do you need for the military, and what do you think you can do to help get more trained folks who can then go into the private sector?
I'll start, Congressman, and thank you for that question. Incredibly important area for all of us operating in the cyber domain each and every day. I would offer that one very important authorization that you could provide to us is increased flexibility in cyber program funding. The adversary is moving at light speed in their attacks of our infrastructure and our capabilities, and we have to be able to develop counters and offensive capabilities at the speed of light, and our current systems are not designed that way. So authorizing some funding flexibility specifically for our cyber programs so that we can be more agile, responsive, and capable both on offense and defense will be critical.
Sir, I would add to those very important points that flexibility is also needed in how we manage the people that we have. Your point about the number of vacancies in a civilian market for cyber professionals and the draw that it takes off the services who do produce incredible, talented folks in this world is there. And so we are looking at every opportunity to allow for our sailors who are trained and experienced in this have opportunities to work inside and outside the Navy, and the flexibility to draw between the active and reserve and the civilian and back. I think that's how the nation can solve this problem, because we can't keep throwing money at people to try to keep them in. That said, our training and the way we're organized has increased significantly. All the services that have invested substantial amount of money in the last several years. But cyber is a warfare area that is also, like everything else we do, subject to readiness cuts. And those cuts come in the form of being able to upgrade from Windows X to Windows Y. And we have to take some cuts to those readiness accounts as well as all the other ones as we see reduced top line. Thanks for the question.
I just said that we've shifted in the Air Force from a communication-centric focus to a cyberspace operations focus. And I'd highlight exactly what was mentioned earlier. There's some acquisition reforms I think that can help us to keep up with that speed that the industry is going with, as well as we've made great progress on our civilian hiring and how we can do that, but I think there's more work to be done there. That we're in a competition for talent. We need to bring the best and brightest. We have fantastic training programs, and then we can help our nation go forward, but there's still work to be done in how we bring on civilians into our workforce.
Sir, I'm with all my colleagues here. We need to recruit, train, and maintain that workforce, and we are short, and I think we're short globally. I think it's a problem that's not just, it's replicated in the military, but it's really for the entire country.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Chairman Thornberry, and thank you for your work, Mr. Chairman, with President Trump. Secretary Mattis, this issue has been raised, and what a great team we have here, the Vice Chiefs, too, to work on the issue of readiness. It's very important to me. I'm very grateful to be the chairman of the Readiness Subcommittee. It gives me the opportunity to work with the ranking member, Madeline Boidayo, and we'll be there to back you up in every way we can to promote our troops, protect our country, protect military families. With that in mind, General Wilson, I appreciate in South Carolina, we have Joint Base Charleston, Shaw Air Force Base, McIntyre Joint National Guard Base, and North Auxiliary Field. Comments of concern have been raised by prior persons serving in the military. Secretary Deborah Lee James stated, quote, less than half of our combat forces are ready for a high-end fight, end of quote. And also Air Force Chief of Staff General David Goldfein stated, combat operations and reductions in our total force, coupled with budgetary instability and lower than planned funding levels have resulted in the smallest, oldest, least ready forces across the full spectrum of operations in our history. These are deeply troubling comments for American families. Two questions. General, have these shortfalls affected the Air Force's ability to generate the necessary forces to meet mission requirements? And secondly, do these shortages still exist? And if so, has the Air Force planned to address them?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman Wilson. The short answer is yes, these still exist. Today we find ourselves less than 50% ready across our Air Force, and we have pockets that are below that. In particular, some of the bases that you mentioned in South Carolina, between Shaw and McIntyre and others, we find, again, not flying enough sorties with enough hours. We know how to fix this, and we did this in the late 70s. As we dug out from there, we can do this again. It starts with, as we've talked before, stable, predictable funding that we can, in our case, we believe we need to increase our manpower to 350,000 airmen. That mans 100% of positions on our books today. And do that over the next 5 to 7 years. While we bring on the manpower, then we make sure we got all the training behind that for those manpower. Then we can increase our weapon system support, so all our support to our depots and our parts and our supply. On top of that, then we can increase our flying hours, and then we can bring down our ops tempo, and we can get our readiness back. But we also, at the same time, have to modernize the force, and we're doing so. As we're bringing on F-35s, we're bringing on KC-46, as we're bringing on B-21s, we need to keep those programs on track. Today, we have 75 less F-35 than we planned to have in 2012. We have 95 less MQ-9s than we planned because of sequestration. So today's modernization has a readiness impact in the future. So today's modernization is tomorrow's readiness. We need to focus on that going forward in the future. With those steps, we can dig out of our readiness challenges we have today, bring it up to full spectrum readiness of about 80%.
Thank you for your commitment. And General Walters, I'm really grateful South Carolina has the Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort, along with Parris Island. We're very grateful for such extraordinary facilities, giving young people extraordinary opportunity to serve our country and achieve to their highest ability. But I am concerned that it was reported last year that we've had only 141 flyable tactical aircraft. That additionally we had accidents that have just been unprecedented, and from that situation of danger to our pilots and communities, what is the current state of marine aviation? Is the correlation between aviation mishaps and the ability of a ready basic aircraft, and how do you plan to address this?
Sir, we're addressing ready basic aircraft issue. We've been doing it for 2 years. Hell of a Congress turned. We need to get up to 589 ready basic aircraft. That just gives enough to train with. We're not there yet. We're at 439, so we're 100 and some short, but we're 50 more than we were 2 years ago. So that's in positive. Your last question about correlation to accidents and ready big aircraft, there is no direct correlation because I've reviewed every accident we've had in the last 2 years. Those pilots have had the adequate time, but I think it's an overall systemic shortfall in our aviation units.
Thank you all for your service. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Ms. Dalio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to continue to highlight the very serious challenges that we face. We have brought ourselves to this point largely by fighting 2-decade-long wars paid for with a credit card while deferring investments in our people, our equipment, and our facilities. This has been further strained by self-imposed fiscal constraints, and our national security apparatus will continue to be hampered without an end to across-the-board sequestration. In the meantime, we must continue to focus our resources on individual operations and maintenance accounts. I have a question for you, Admiral Moran. As we discussed yesterday in my office, there are significant readiness needs facing the Navy, and our ship maintenance infrastructure has limited capacity. Now, the recent unfunded priorities list indicates as much, with ship depot maintenance at the top. However, that conflicts with the administration that has indicated a desire to focus instead on construction. In an ideal world, the Navy would be able to modernize while shrinking the readiness deficit, but the reality is that we do not have a blank check. So my question to you, Admiral, is how does the Navy intend to prioritize these competing needs? In other words, with additional resources, will it focus on immediate actions such as addressing deferred ship maintenance or aviation depot throughout, or instead on building new vessels?
Ma'am, thank you for the question. If additional resources come available in fiscal year 17, we absolutely will put that money towards ship depot maintenance, aircraft maintenance, cybersecurity, the readiness shortfalls we've talked about here this morning. As I stated in my opening, if we don't take care of the foundation of the Navy, which is the 275 ships we have today, it doesn't do us much good to continue to buy new. So it is somewhat of a false choice to choose between the future size of the Navy and the current condition of the Navy, but to your point, the resources are where they are. And if additional funds come available in 17, we'll absolutely put them in the readiness accounts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Admiral. And my second question is open for any of the witnesses. The Department of Defense has been asking for the authority to have another round of BRAC for years, citing that manpower and excess infrastructure are a drain on operations and maintenance budgets, and ultimately affecting readiness. So do you believe the department needs another BRAC? And if a new round were authorized, how would you reallocate the resources that are currently being used to maintain excess capacity? Any one of you? I just need one answer.
Congressman Bordello,
My time is running out, so
we have
that's the
excess
reason.
capacity in the Air Force. We think we have about 25% excess capacity at our bases. We think that we're, in today's budget environment, it makes sense to invest wisely. So a BRAC would help us to do smart investment of the bases preparing for the future. And we could take the money we're spending on the excess infrastructure and put that back into solving some of our fiscal problems.
So in other words, you're supporting BRAC closures.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody else have a different?
No, I'll
Yes,
pile
Ed.
on. We are in a similar situation, depending on what size force you describe. For 490,000 soldier active force, which is about 25,000 more than we are today, we have 21% excess facilities to need. We save year over year, annually, $1 billion from the 05 BRAC that took place. So it's real money that we really need to reinvest into the deferred maintenance and infrastructure backlog that we have for the Army. It's $11 billion in deferred infrastructure, sustainment, restoration, and modernization.
Thank you.
So it would be very helpful.
I'd say for the Air Force, that there's $25 billion of money we need to put back into our bases of deferred maintenance.
And General?
Ma'am, we think we're about right, but we'll participate in any BRAC to see if there's any savings with our partners.
Thank you very much. And I submit the rest of my time to the chairman.
Chairman appreciates it. Thank you, ma'am. Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All of you have an aviation component to your branch of service. There is a growing concern about a pilot shortage in the United States military, and I think that is also reflected in the fact that we have a growing demand in civil aviation for pilots. So what is your approach, if you could all reflect on your approaches in terms of how to deal with the issue, whether it's a retention bonus structure, an enhancement of some sort, but also the fact is that we've got experienced pilots in the United States military leaving for jobs in civilian airlines who would probably still like to affiliate in some way. And so the question is, should we shift then some of those flying billets from the active duty to the Guard Reserve? Maybe we'll start with the United States Army and work our way down. Up, maybe. Yeah, okay. You've got helicopter pilots. Okay.
We're not having a problem retaining our helicopter pilots, so I will defer to the other services.
Fantastic. Okay.
We'd like some of your helicopter pilots. Sir, it's a great question. It's one we do focus on a lot as we manage our force. I would tell you that the thing that keeps pilots in our services, I speak for the Navy, but I'm sure General Wilson would agree because we've both flown, is to fly. If you don't have the adequate resources of airplanes and money to resource fan hours, that dissatisfaction will show up with people walking out the door. We are all facing that shortage today. Not enough airplanes. We're not fixing them fast enough. We don't have the spare parts that we need. And young men and women are not flying nearly enough to keep the job satisfaction at a level that they would like.
So, Admiral, your view is it is a morale issue based on the ability to get flying hours?
It absolutely is a morale issue.
General Wilson?
Yeah, today we find ourselves producing about 1,200 pilots a year. And if I add the Navy and Marines together, we produce about 1,000 pilots a year. The airlines are hiring 4,000 pilots a year. Right, so I think this is bigger than just a service problem. Like, this is a national problem that we have to be able to get at and work with the industry on how to do that. Certainly the Guard Reserves are a big part of this. Certainly the whole team on how we go for this. We can recruit a lot of people to fly. We don't have a problem there. Retaining them is a problem. Today, for the last 5 years, our retention of pilots has declined. We need to keep about 65% after the tenure point. Today, we're doing less than half of that. So I'd say it's a quality of life and quality of service. So as the Admiral said, we're doing everything we can to improve, to reduce the additional duties, all their burdens, the administrative on our pilots, and let them do their job. And to build that culture that most military pilots, the warfighting culture ethos that you see in the squadrons, that will keep people in the service. But there's certainly a cultural aspect to this, but there's also to reduce the quality, improve the quality of life, and reduce the administrative burdens on our crews and let them fly. But this is a national problem. It's not just a service problem.
The Guard and Reserve have pilots who have served on active duty that transfer into the Guard and Reserve and that are flying in civilian airlines. And so are you looking at all at restructuring?
Absolutely. That's all part of how we're looking. And we're engaging with all the corporate airline leaders on how to do this together and how do we do this smarter. But right now we have a math problem that doesn't close. We produce 2,000, the nation needs about 4,000.
General Walters?
Sir, fortuitous, we have a meeting with the Commandant tomorrow to discuss this particular issue and all the levers you just described, reserves, how do we keep them once we get them? I'll add one more is how do we sign them up for when we sign them up? All those will be part of it, and we might end up having to pay a bonus for those select people to keep them around and to make so we can get them a draw. In the end, it's their willingness to serve and value that they put on service that I think will be the biggest magnet. I don't think we can dump enough money on them to keep them there just with the money.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Courtney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for your excellent testimony this morning. Admiral Moran, I'd like to, again, go back to your very frank advice that we really need to focus on maintenance and repair in terms of just getting to meet the operational demand. Shipbuilding, which I think has been an exciting year with the FSA that came out, but having said that, it's a long game, and we're not going to see the fruits of that for 2017 action for years to come. So your description about the fact that there is this backlog building up of work that's not getting performed, I was wondering if you could be a little more descriptive about how that looked in terms of whether it's carriers or surface ships or submarines. What's happening out there in terms of that that backlog that's building up?
Yes, sir, Congressman, thanks for the question. First of all, in 17 alone, if we not see some kind of supplemental come in for this fiscal year without a CR, within a month, we're going to have to shut down air wings. We're going to have to defer maintenance on several availabilities for our surface ships and submarine maintenance facilities. We're just flat out of money to be able to do that. I think everyone here knows that in 17, the Navy took a $5 billion cut in its top line. If that comes to fruition, that's $2 billion of readiness cuts we have to take, which is immediately applied to the things like ship events. So we've had cases in the past here, in the recent past, where we've had to decertify a submarine from being able to dive because we cannot get it into nuclear maintenance that is needed. The crew on the USS Albany, for example, went over 48 months before getting out of the yards because several delays, at least 4 different delays because of other priorities. And those other priorities start with our SSBN force, which is our nuclear strategic deterrent submarine force, carriers, and then we get to SSN. So if any of those get disrupted, a carrier goes along in one of our public yards, then we're going to bump things like our SSNs. So that crew of Albany, the CO took over at the start of that maintenance avail, gave up command before the end of that maintenance avail, and the crew, the entire crew, did not deploy. To someone's point here earlier, you cannot buy back that experience.
Right.
And so those are the kinds of real impacts we're seeing in the yards because of the shortage of resources and continuing rating of the readiness accounts in order to keep the rest of the Navy whole.
I mean, that story about the Albany really resonates, because in this room, we've heard from Admiral Harris at PACOM, General Scaparrotti at UCOM, that they need more submarines now. And to the extent that, we're not going to build a Virginia-class now because it takes 5 years, but if we can, the Albany and the Boise and those others out and underway, then, we can respond to those, combatant commanders. So let's assume, we fully fund, deal with the resource issue. We also deal with the funding certainty issue, which your testimony pointed out as another, big problem. I mean, there's still, I think, are issues, though, in terms of allocation of work and in the shipyards. I mean, in testimony, he said for a variety of reasons, our shipyards are struggling to get our ships through maintenance periods on time. So so again, let's assume that we take care of some resource questions. I mean, how can we, deal with that? I mean, can we call on the private yards to help take on some of the work, and can Congress help with that process?
Yes, sir. You're absolutely correct. Obviously we try to maximize our public yard workload, but we try to smooth out those god-awful sand charts we're all looking at, we're used to staring at, to try to smooth out the work across those yards. And where we need that extra capacity, we do use the private yards to do it. Montpelier is a good example today that's in EB, for example. So we will continue to look at those. The problem is the very late determination that we no longer have the capacity in the public yards. When we turn to private yards at that moment, it becomes a very expensive proposition. So the degree to which we can take advantage of your support and working with our private yards to try to drive down the costs, it makes it easier for us to have to surge to those private yards when public yards become the capacity exceed, or the work exceeds the capacity because of delays that are already there, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I think Kevin McCoy described it as one shipyard. That should be our philosophy.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yield back.
The story about the Albany is amazing. Mr. Franks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of the witnesses for your noble service to America. Mr. Chairman, I have what's probably somewhat of a redundant question, but it seems important to emphasize. On March 22nd of last year, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunsford, said, quote, absorbing significant cuts of the last 5 years has resulted in our underinvesting in critical capabilities. And unless we reverse sequestration, we will be unable to execute the current defense strategy, close quote. So General Walters, and might ask a follow-up by General Allyn, if you maybe keep the responses fairly concise. In your professional military opinion, is your service able to execute our current defense strategy with our current force levels?
Sir, if your definition of strategy is to do two things simultaneously, the answer is no.
And for the United States Army, as General Milley has testified before this committee, and as have I in prior years, only at high risk.
Mm-hmm. So maybe give you a real-world example when you talked about two scenarios. In your professional military opinion, at its current force level, would your service, and I'll begin with you again first, General Walters, would your service be capable of executing a Korea scenario while maintaining your current commitments around the world?
Sir, we'd be able to execute a Korea scenario, but we would have to draw from other commitments in the world to make it a timeline required.
And likewise, for the United States Army, we would both draw down committed forces elsewhere, as well as have forces arriving late to need based on current readiness levels, as we talked about at the outset with the chairman.
With your, and I'll broaden it to the committee, whoever would like to take a shot at it, with your current planned instruct levels, can you meet the force planning construct outlined in the 2014 Quadrennial Defense Review to, quote, defeat a regional adversary and deny another aggressor in another region? And maybe General or Admiral Moran maybe take a shot at it.
Well, my answer would be very consistent with my brothers here, and that is we will be able to employ our force, but at great risk being there late and at higher casualties than we would expect.
And I would second that.
And no disagreement on the panel. So final question, Chairman, and I address it to all of you. In your professional military opinions, is your respective services too small given current and emerging mission requirements?
Yes, we are. For the current defense planning guidance, now the Secretary of Defense has directed a new strategic review that could result in a revised force construct requirement, but we'll undergo that process and provide our recommendations on what the size of the Army must be, but today it is too small.
I agree with General Allyn for the Navy as well.
Same for the force.
Same for the Marine Corps, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, they say that sometimes, there's nothing more encouraging to hear than to hear your own convictions fall from another's lips. But in this case, I think I'm more alarmed by that than anything else, and yet it does seem to be a consistent circumstance. And I just hope the committee and the country and the new administration is considering the responses of these gentlemen carefully. And with that, I would yield back. Thank you all.
Thank you. Ms. Tsongas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here today as we have this very important discussion. Last week, and this has been in the context of a number of hearings that we've had to sort of discuss this global situation that we have to deal with and deal with appropriately and successfully. And last week, this committee had the opportunity to hear from General Petraeus and John McLaughlin about some of the pressing threats and challenges facing our nation. And in their testimony, I was struck by the focus they both placed on the shifting global balance of power and need for the United States to maintain its technological superiority in relation to both Russia and China. And just last week, the New York Times reported on Chinese advances in computer science, engineering, in relation to declining U.S. investments in these areas. Historically, our nation's national labs and our FFRDCs have led the way advancing new technology for our nation's military. But today, private firms, many located overseas, are increasingly taking the lead, making investments in those technologies that have both consumer and military applications, so they see a dual benefit to it. And robotics and artificial intelligence are just two examples of where the private sector has been increasingly successful. So as we're talking today about the many challenges we face, and much of the emphasis is on end strength and the need for more people, it seems to me that as we're thinking about how we maintain our competitive advantage, that it's not just about end strength, but it's about how we use cutting-edge technologies to leverage fiscally thoughtful investments, whether they be in people or other areas. And so to that end, General Wilson, and this certainly comes as I am a representative from Massachusetts, we have great labs and FFRDCs in our state that have done such great work. What is the Air Force doing to modernize its labs and defense-focused FFRDCs to make sure that we are able to keep the Air Force at the cutting edge of technology? And how much of a priority is it for you, given the many competing demands for investment?
Yes, Congresswoman, we have investments going into MIT Lincoln Labs to help improve the infrastructure there. I've been out to visit them, and I can tell you they are absolutely world-class. And there's some technologies that they're working on. You mentioned AI and robotics. They're also working on directed energy, some things that can truly change the game. So that's an important focus of our force. As we modernize our force, we need to modernize smartly across the specific areas. And as you mentioned, industry in many areas is leading us in that way. We're collaborating with industry, whether we work with folks like DARPA, our Force Research Lab, with this Strategic Capabilities Office, Dr. Roper and his team, all the FFRDCs and all the national labs that also are reaching out with all the private sector to make sure that we can stay up to date with them. I look at this as almost like the the FSRM, Facilities Restoration Modernization accounts. We have to invest so much today in our technology that's going to get us to tomorrow. Right now, our R&D is about 2%. We need to keep it at that or even grow that, because otherwise our adversaries will outpace us. But we have a great collaboration with all the national labs. They're truly national treasures. We need to leverage those to help us stay ahead of all of our adversaries going forward.
Well, and those national treasures don't remain national treasures without the significant investment that needs to be made in them. And I know, given the constrained resources, I just want to be reassured that we aren't short-sighted, and that we're not putting in making those tough choices, we're not putting what we need to, because technology has a long timeline, and yet it also can move very quickly. And we don't want to be behind the 8 ball because we've just been too short-sighted in some of our near-term investments. And so to that end, also, General Allyn, I wanted to ask you how you're prioritizing your investments. Again, Massachusetts has a great facility that really focuses on the soldier and how to best protect the soldier to make them as ready as possible. But again, fully equipped and thinking thoughtfully what kind of investments the Army is making.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman, and I'm sorry you're missing the championship parade in Boston this morning.
I'm very sorry myself.
That's a great sacrifice on your part, but we likewise fully leverage not only Naval labs, as you've highlighted, but also MIT Lincoln Labs. I have been there in the last 2 months on several programs that are critical to us to be able to continue to dominate in the multi-domain environment of the future, and we will continue to leverage both the great soldier enhancement initiatives that come from NIC, as well as technology that is critical. You highlighted the importance of technology to readiness. It is the right balance of capability and capacity that makes a ready force, and all of ours are trying to ensure that we maintain that balance as we move forward.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today for this very important hearing and pretty sobering testimony, but I think we all need to hear it. General Wilson, I appreciate your highlighting the recent mission that went from Whiteman over Libya. We're so proud of them. And your testimony goes right along with the question I wanted to ask, where you talked about how you feel like that our training makes us capable for Middle Eastern conflict, but we need to have peer adversary training. And I know with your 35 years in the Air Force as a pilot and flying one, and your participation in Red Flag over the years, I wanted to ask you about the capability of the training exercise to meet our near-peer competitors that we are facing today. So is the Air Force training with a fight-tonight mentality against a high-end threat like China and Russia? And what I mean by this is, are you confident in the Air Force's ability to accurately train against a near-peer adversary? Can you give our young men and women a glimpse of what Night 1 and Kaliningrad look like? Can you prepare them and put their families' mind at ease such that a flare-up in the South China Seas would look routine?
Yeah, Congressman Hartzler, we are putting significant investment into our ranges and infrastructure at places like Nellis Air Force Base. The red flag that I started flying with in the 80s is we've changed it considerably in how it incorporates space and cyber into it, but the range infrastructure, the threats, the way we can replicate threats hasn't improved to a significant degree till recently. We've changed that. We've put significant investment into range infrastructure to give us the right threat emitters, the right ability to give us a Kaliningrad-like environment with high-end threats and allow our crew to be able to train in that. We're not there yet, though. We're just started that investment to improve our ranges and infrastructure. But that will be critical going forward. It's also critical that we invest in our what we call live virtual constructive training, because in the future, I'm not going to have the flying hours or the money to be able to train an F-35 pilot, give them all the training outdoors in the live environment. I'm going to have to do some of that in the virtual or constructive environment. So we're putting money into that live virtual constructive so that our folks can home station and we can replicate a red flag-like environment or a high-end training scenario to give them the most realistic training possible. But it's important that we continue that investment of our ranges, our infrastructure, and our live virtual constructive environments going forward.
So if 100 was the number for feeling very, very confident that you'd be able to go up against the training was adequate for 5th gen, zero, no, what would be the number where you feel like that we'd be able to go up as 5th gen adversary?
Well, again, if you go to one of our red flag exercises, it is absolutely fantastic training. The problem is not enough people could go to it, and we don't do those frequently enough. So that the average crew, I said, says 50% ready against a high-end threat in certain parts of our Air Force. That number is considerably below that. So again, it takes all those resources we talked about. I got to have the people, the training, the weapons system support, the training ranges, the flying hours, and I got to be and time to do that, to build up that high-end risk. So today, we're not near where we need to be. I'd say 50%.
All right. Look forward to working with you to help get it up to 100, and so everyone can meet the threats that you're facing. Thank you. You'll back.
Mr. Commandy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you so much for your service. I don't know how many of these hearings we've gone to, and it always comes down to more money, and somebody mentioned sequestration, and it seems to me that with the unified control of Congress and the administration that sequestration is a problem, that perhaps it could be solved quickly. Nonetheless, the money problem is likely to persist. A couple of questions, just to follow up on the question about the airmen and the pilots that are necessary. I understand that the Air Force is now moving to provide or to allow pilots that are not officers to fly certain missions. General Wilson, if you could comment on that briefly, and is it going to help solve this problem?
Congressman, we think so. Let me tell you our efforts today. We've got the initial group of enlisted aviators into our RQ4 Global Hawk program. We think over the next few years we'll be able to grow it so that a majority of the pilots in the Global Hawk will be enlisted. We'll learn from that. We'll see if we can take that example and do that in other areas like our Q9s and others, but that's to be determined. But we think that will help alleviate some of the shortages right now, but it's in the first stages. We've got the second class in training. We only have a handful of enlisted operators going through that training program right now.
Okay. I think the question really comes to this committee and whether or this committee and the Senate, whether we're going to force this faster or not. Seems to me we ought to let this go in a way that is wise, not necessarily slow, but at least thoughtfully done. The next question, if I might, General Wilson, has to do with, I guess we want to have everything, and we want to have everything now. A long discussion has ensued about the aircraft and about the personnel, but not much discussion about the ground-based strategic deterrent and the multi-billions that will be spent on that. And the question arises in my mind, and I hope this committee's mind, about the necessity of rebuilding the entire nuclear mission, all the bombs, all of the delivery systems from Naval to Air Force. And General, if you could comment on this issue. Can we afford all of it?
Government, I think we can. If we look at this, if we look at the investment across the nuclear enterprise going forward on all modernization programs, it'll peak at about 5.5% of our defense budget. So it's a matter of priorities. Foundationally, what our nation provides, the nuclear deterrent provides our nation is incalculable. It's provided 70-plus years of no conflict between major powers. As I look across the globe and the landscape that you talk about changing, as we see what our adversaries are doing across their force, we have no option other than to modernize. Our forces were built, many of them in the 60s, modernized early in the 70s, that we're still maintaining today. There comes a time where we have to modernize, and we've delayed the modernization of these programs for far too long. Specifically, the ground-based strategic deterrent. If we look at today's Minuteman IIIs, which are put in the ground, and actually have Minuteman I parts on them, the date designed in the 50s, put in place in the early 60s, Minuteman III is in the early 70s. We're now having 50-year life cycles of these missiles. The strategic stability that they afford our nation is well worth the cost and investment going forward, and we welcome that discussion about the importance of the nuclear triad.
Well, I certainly think we need to have that discussion. We need to have that discussion in detail, and it's not just about the ICBMs that are in the ground, whether they need to be renewed. It's about the Naval and the new submarines and new bombs that go with new missiles, as well as the new F-21 long-range bomber and the cruise missiles. And the question for all of us is a trillion-dollar question over the next 25 years or so, with the bow wave occurring within the next 5 to 7 years. And the Army needs more men and women, as does the Marine Corps. And you need more fighter pilots and more aircraft, and the Navy needs new submarines and another 55 ships on top of what you already have. And what's the money? And the President's suggesting a tax cut of more than $1 trillion. So we better have a big credit card. I think that's called the deficit. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Chairman. General Walters, Marine Corps Logistics Base in Albany, Georgia, got hit pretty hard with those storms. I'll be there this coming Friday. That's not technically my district, but I live about 30 minutes away from that base, and it's certainly important to us. Could you give me any estimate of when that base will be back to fully operational status, if that has not already occurred? And how and why is this particular base critical to the Marine Corps?
Congressman, thanks for the question, and we're tracking that daily. I know what damage has been done to the infrastructure. We think by the end of this week, we'll have all of that collapsed building and warehouses off. We can take a look and analyze what damage was done to the equipment that was inside of it, so I can understand the full cost. In our ongoing efforts in 2017, we've identified at least the first cost of that. Your second question is when we're going to get it back full up round. I mean, they're operating in a minimal capacity now in areas that weren't affected, but it's absolutely critical. That's where our tanks, our amphibious vehicles, our light armor vehicles, and our artillery get through depot. I don't have an estimate for you now when that's going to start up again. We do other components. We only have 2 depots, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast in Barstow. It's good that we have 2 because if it's going to be a long period of time, we're going to make a decision on what we do out at Barstow and what we don't do at Barstow to take the critical things and move out there. My preference would be to rapidly get Albany back up running at 100%.
Would you agree that from a deployment standpoint, it is important that we be able to deploy from both the East Coast and the West Coast?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. We're a global nation.
Yes, sir. General Wilson, David Goldfein in February, I'll quote him, 25 years of continuous combat operations and reductions to our total force coupled with budget instability and lower than planned funding levels have resulted in one of the smallest, oldest, and least ready forces across the full spectrum of our operations and our history. Your testimony was close to that. General Welsh, who I think is just a wonderful leader, prior to 1992, the Air Force procured an average of 200 fighter aircraft per year. In the 2.5 decades since, curtailed modernization has resulted in the procurement of less than an average of 25 fighters yearly. In short, the technology and capability gaps between America and our adversaries are closing dangerously fast. General Wilson, it's clear there are not enough fighter aircraft to sustain readiness, both pilot flight hours and line aircraft. Yet the Air Force is contemplating reducing the workforce to include the depots. Can you explain how this squares up?
Yeah, I don't believe we're planning on reducing depots. Depots are critical to going forward in the future. General Welsh, Chief 20, I will also agree, is a remarkable airman.
Sir.
A real visionary on what we need to do with our force. Chief 21, as you've talked about, outlined the problem we have at hand. We used to procure about 200 fighter airplanes a year. Today, we're producing less than 20. That's why 21 of our 39 fleets of airplane are older than 27 years old. To maintain those 27-year-old airplanes takes a lot of work. It takes the heroic efforts by lots of maintainers, and of course, it takes our depots. We have to actually get more out of our depots, because each time we bring in a new airplane or bring in an old airplane today, they're finding things they've never found before, whether it be an F-16, a B-1, or C-5. They're finding things that they've never seen. So they're real artisans on how they fix these planes, and our depots will be critical to success going forward.
One last question. I represent Robins Air Force Base, and a lot of those men and women work at Robins. And as you said, they're very skilled and talented, and without them, our planes wouldn't be able to fly today. When can we expect guidance issued down to the base level on the workforce?
We hope that the guidance will come out this week of what's exempted and categories to allow our workforce to continue. As you know, we're still just digging out of the sequestration and the effects that had the furloughing of our civilians. Yes. Our civilian workforce is critical, whether it be maintaining our planes, sustaining them at operations across our Air Force, any reductions of the skilled workforce, and 96% of our civilians work outside of Washington, D.C. They work in our depots and our flight lines, and so we have to be able to sustain those and grow our civilian workforce.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your service.
Mr. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the vice chiefs for service, your leadership, and your testimony today. And I also really appreciate the guidance that you have given to Congress far in repealing the Budget Control Act, ending this threat of sequestration, having budgets that are funded and predictable and consistent instead of having continuing resolutions, and pointing out the real value in a base realignment and closure process to be able to direct and focus resources where they're going to be most effective for our service members and missions. And so on each of those, I'd like to be part of working with my colleagues from both sides of the aisle to get these things done. I think you've made a very good case for why we need to do it and why we need to do it now. For General Allyn, the 3 of 58 brigade combat teams that are ready to fight tonight, I think one, it says something about our form of government that we would say that publicly in a meeting like this and advertise our state of preparedness or lack of preparedness to the rest of the world. But I understand we say these kind of things to make sure that we're making fully informed decisions, and I hope that your comments spur us to take the necessary actions to reverse this trend and to make sure that we are where we need to be. I'm guessing that whatever analogous body to HASC that exists in Russia, not talking about these preparedness levels in Russia in a public way, but generally speaking, could you tell us how we compare, if you can, in a setting like this one? Are they at 3 of 58?
I got to be honest with you, Congressman. I don't have access to their unit status reporting. I do get ours every month, and so I have a fingertip feel for where we stand in the United States Army. And obviously, on behalf of the Congress, it's our responsibility to deliver the best readiness that we can at the funding levels we have. And every commander in the field is getting after that, as you know, from Fort Bliss, Texas. I will offer, it is not all doom and gloom. One of the biggest impacts for us in terms of elevating our readiness above what it is today is personnel shortages. Right? It's the first thing we're doing with the increased authorization that you have given us in the NDA this year, is to fill the hole in our current formations so that they can be manned at a level to deploy ready to fight, despite some of the medically non-deployable numbers that we have in our force. So we are absolutely committed to getting after that as our top priority.
Let me ask you another question. What do you need above what was authorized in FY17 NDAA to meet the gaps that you highlighted today? What's a dollar amount that this committee should know about?
Well, that work is going to happen next week. We got some initial guidance midweek this week from the Secretary of Defense on how to approach this. As you know from the memo being published publicly, the first priority is that which can deliver readiness immediately in 17 and 18. Then it is achieving a better balanced force, fill in the holes in our current formation. And then it's building the joint force that we need for the future. And we are aggressively working with the OSD staff to finalize exactly what that figure will look like, and we will be getting that to you as quickly as we can.
Last question, you may not have enough time to answer, and if not, we'll take it for the record, but the tempo of the last 16 years of combat in Afghanistan and Iraq really taken a toll, certainly on our service members, on their units, on their families. And I'm really interested in where we are in moving to the Army Sustainable Readiness model to replace the Army Force Generation model that is probably appropriate for some of our needs at the time, but long-term I think is compromising readiness and unit cohesion. I know you only have 15 seconds left. You want to answer for the record, I'd be happy to take that.
You're absolutely correct. It is a top priority. Army Forces Command is running a pilot now with units across the total force using this new model. The goal is to be able to sustain readiness of our forces across time, regardless of their deployment status. And the goal is 2/3 of our force ready to deploy at any moment in time. And we are absolutely getting after that.
Thank you.
Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for your service to our country and your time with us today. Admiral Moran, the preponderance of our current 274-ship Navy was constituted as a result of the Reagan-era 600-ship Navy. These ships were built throughout the 1980s and 90s. Many of them have reached or are beyond their original service life expectancy. In your best military judgment, are we building, and are we capable of building, given our shipyard capacity, enough ships to not only maintain this already hazardly low 274-ship Navy in battle force, but to also increase it to the 355 ships as called for in the latest force structure assessment?
Congressman, thanks for the question. You're absolutely right that for the last couple decades we've been living off the fat, if you will, of that Reagan-era buildup, but it's coming home to roost now. Back then we used to build up to 5 DDGs a year. Today we're fortunate to get 2 to 3 a year. So when you look at the math, it doesn't add up over time as that Reagan-era buildup starts to decommission because they reach the end of their life, and we're not building at a rate to replace them. We have programmed in 17 and 18, as we are beginning that program look now, to arrest the decline in our total numbers. That is why we've come down since 9/11 from 316 ships to 275 today. We just have not been replenishing them at the same rate as they've been going up. So we've taken a hard look at whether there is industrial capacity to not only arrest the decline, but to start to climb back out of it. And there is industrial capacity to do it. We have vendors and sub-vendors, though, that are in short supply that we have to begin to have a conversation with. So to General Allyn's point, once we get past this year and the immediate readiness needs, we are going to take a hard look along with the OSD to determine what the strategy calls for and the size and shape and function of this force, the joint force in the future. We're prepared, and I think we can go to a high ramp earlier than is currently programmed, but the resourcing clearly is not there.
What effect will this low level of ships have on our combatant commands to safeguard and secure our economic shipping lanes, execute current missions, and answer the call should a contingent operation arise?
Sir, today we satisfy about 40% of the combatant commander requests for Naval forces, 40%. And that is why the size of the Navy we have today is too small. It's also why that small Navy is being driven at a higher up tempo year after year. That higher up tempo is driving up maintenance requirements, delays in shipyards, and our ability to get that force back at sea. So our ability to satisfy growing combatant commander requirements is is not going to be satisfying to anyone in their future unless we have a larger Navy.
Can you expand upon why the Navy is unique compared to the other services with regard to why the Navy should invest current readiness funds into shipbuilding and the impact that that has on the future readiness of the Navy?
Yes, sir. Clearly, it takes a long time to build a capital ship or any ship of the line. So when we invest money in current year dollars or near year dollars, it takes several years for that capability to deliver. So we are unique from that standpoint. The number of years it takes to deliver an aircraft carrier or a ballistic submarine or a high-end destroyer is well beyond the fit-up in many cases. So it has an impact over long-term readiness if we don't invest now.
Let me just say in closing, I was honored to be able to go to the RIMPAC exercise in Hawaii this past summer, and not only to see our Navy at work, but to see other navies at work, because there are 27, I think, other nations that were participating with us. And I was struck by the esprit de corps of the sailors that I was with. I was struck by their commitment to the mission, and I was struck by the fact that they're doing a lot more with a lot less. But I worry that there's a time coming when even the great sailors that we've got cannot continue to do more with ever dwindling number of resources that we're providing to them. And I was struck by that quote that General Wilson gave from General MacArthur. That was really hit me very hard. I hope that we never, ever get to the point where we're there again, where we literally have to say it's too late. I don't think it's too late, but the clock ticking is ticking on all of us, and I hope that we'll work together to rebuild all of our armed forces, and I appreciate what each of you do. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank all of you for being here today and your thoughtful and certainly enlightening testimony and for your service to our nation. You know, I represent a district in Nevada about a dozen miles from Nellis Air Force Base, home to the U.S. Air Force Warfare Center, the largest advanced combat training mission in the world. And our primary mission includes testing of the nation's most advanced aircraft and weapon systems, tactical air training, advanced training on the Nevada Test Training Range, and the largest, Nevada Testing and Training Range, the largest air and ground space available for peacetime military operations, and it looks very much like the Middle East. So in the summertime, we're not so happy about that, but it's good for the military. And even though we're a small state, we have the 6th most active duty Air Force personnel in the country, and 1 out of every 300 Nevadans is active duty Air Force. So it's very important in our community. You've touched on a lot of issues today, but your testimony really seems to have put in place and emphasized the importance of passing a budget so that we can plan on your side and on the private side. So I'd like to ask about uniform versus contractor. Are there responsibilities that contractors are doing now because you don't have the money in your budgets? And conversely, what are service members doing that contractors used to do because we don't have the funds on that side?
Congressman, we've got contractors involved in all aspects of our organization. So today, for example, at the Laughlin Air Force Base, one of our pilot training bases, it's contract maintenance. So they're doing all the flight line maintenance. So we've contracted that out in our balancing of modernization capacity and readiness. We didn't have the funds, and that's how parts of that blue suit used to be done by blue suit maintenance, now being done by contractors. And that example would permeate across every unit and every part of our Air Force. Contractors are involved in some aspects of how we do operations. Is it too much or too little? I guess I'd say that it's going to depend. There's areas that I think should be more, in our case, Air Force blue suit maintenance or blue suit operations, but we're having to rely on contractors because we don't have the people that we once had to be able to do that.
So what resources do you need for training to increase the people pipeline? Because really, we can have maintenance, we have equipment, but without the people and the training to do it. So what resources do you need to improve that people pipeline on both ends?
Well, we have the infrastructure to be able to assess and train the right people. We need the authorizations for the people and the funding goes with it to be able to do that.
Thank you.
So,
I yield back my time.
Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks again for your service. Admiral Moran, I'd like to begin with you and ask you to elaborate on the backlog of maintenance that we're seeing within the Navy. And I'm going to go right to our aircraft carriers. As you know, the CEO has said he wants to stay on 7-month deployment schedules. There's been delays of CNs getting to the yard. When that happens, it also has an impact on maintenance abilities and therefore deployment schedules, training schedules, and now we're seeing that reverberate down to our SSN, our attack submarines, because all of this work on our nuclear ships, as you know, has to be done at our public shipyards. Give me your perspective in several ways. First of all, we're now seeing the impact on SSNs, with the USS Boise now being tied up at the dock, one of our active attack submarines tied up at the dock for 2 years before maintenance will begin. And again, that takes a while before she gets back to the fleet, and another 5 getting ready to be tied up at the dock, awaiting maintenance, again, for that 2-year period before the first work gets done. You have that. You have carrier gaps now in the Persian Gulf. You're seeing that start to back up with carriers going to the yards, and then not just maintenance availability backups, but then that affects training schedules. I want to ask you this. Are you going to change deployment schedules, lengthen them from 7 months? Will training times, pre-deployment workups, will they be shortened? How are you going to deal with this to make sure that all of these ships get to the yard, get maintained, get back to the fleet? If we're going to get to 355 ships, we have got to do all possible to maintain the ships that we have.
Congressman, thanks for your question. It's a very complex answer. Yeah. I'll try to keep it simple.
Okay.
When we hit sequestration and furlough back in 2013, we saw several of our civilian sailors in our yards leave who were eligible for retirement, eligible to move on, just because they were tired of dealing with this kind of uncertainty. Yeah. In the years since then, when we've been able to hire back, we've hired back in numbers that are fairly substantial, but they're young, they're inexperienced. And so today, in our public shipyards, roughly 50% of our civilian workforce there has less than 5 years experience. And when we're talking operating or maintaining nuclear-capable ships, that's not necessarily a place to be. What happens with something like that is, take Bush, for example. Bush just came out late, 141 days from its availability. 141 days, which delayed its ability to get on deployment to relieve the Eisenhower. CNO has maintained and will try to maintain the best of our ability the 7-month deployments and take risk by gapping in certain parts of the globe. When that in order to get Ike back here to get her started on her upkeep. Bush was late for a lot of reasons. One was the junior nature of the workforce. We had upwards of 7% of rework on Bush throughout that 13-month maintenance period. So until the workforce gains that experience, we're going to continue to see rework issues. There are training issues involved, but we're starting to see some nice turnaround in the public yards along those lines. But again, until we see that workforce mature, performance in the yards continues to improve, and then the timelines that we put our ships in maintenance begin to shrink back to what's planned and can be executed, we're going to continue to see these problems. So when a carrier gets delayed, to your point, when a carrier gets delayed like Bush for 141 days, that bumps an SSN. Yeah. And so that workforce cannot go over and work on the Boise. So the Boise's delayed and delayed. Now she's 2 years delayed. I used the example earlier of Albany that got delayed for 48 months before it came out. An entire crew lost proficiency and experience on that sub. We have the same concerns about Boise. We had the same concerns about Montpelier, which we put in a public yard just to try to offload some of this workload. So there are huge impacts to the place we're at and on the maintenance front. On the public yards, we're trying to spread it with the private as best we can, but it's just going to take time and resources. It's been highlighted here.
Very quickly, what can you do to mitigate this backlog? Because the backlog's only going to grow. You can't gain back time. You can't gain back workforce experience to be able to accelerate that. I mean, you can hire up in the yards, but you're still hiring new people, so the proficiency there is not going to be there. How do you gain that back?
Yes, sir. I can answer that for the record. Quickly, though, it is by sticking to the deployment lengths that we have so we don't wear out the equipment so much that the when it gets back in the yards, it's got to go for longer periods of time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Moran, you mentioned in your testimony about discussed aviation readiness. I note that you're a CO VP46, and now we've moved on to P8s. They're relatively new. The Growlers are Super Hornet derivatives. They're fairly new. So what class of aviation in the Navy is really a focus for readiness and maintenance?
The focus right now is clearly with our partners in the Marine Corps on our legacy Hornet fleet and the beginning bow wave of Super Hornets who we're flying harder and more often than we would have because of the issues in the legacy fleet. So it's a twofer. The strike fighter community is definitely the focus of our energy right now.
General Walters, you want to comment on that?
Sir, it's our focus, also our biggest challenge, and I would throw in our 53Ks, our old heavy lift helicopters, and our V-22s by capacity. Those are all the three priorities for us, sir.
Where the focus is great. Admiral Moran, back to you on an issue regarding the Growlers and the OBOGs problem. Can you, so I understand that physiological event teams is investigating a variety of solutions for the OBOGs issue. Two things, can you update us on that, where they are? And second, do you envision that if there is a supplemental that comes to us, that money to further research or try to get to a solution faster will be part of that?
Yes, sir. First of all, on the Growler issue, that was a maintenance procedural issue. We have fixed that. We do not have a problem with the Growlers today. The physiological events you're referring to are both, and they're different, one for the legacy Hornet fleet and one the Super Hornet fleet. And I'm happy to pass you where we are with that. We have not found the smoking gun to that. It is very complicated, and it's we've taken a Hornet and torn it down at parade rest. In other words, we've taken it all the way down to as if we were going to build it from scratch to try to piece it together to see where these events are coming from, so that we can more accurately put an engineering solution to it. In the meantime, we've put a lot of mitigators out there in terms of how we've provided our pilots watches and what we call slam sticks, so we can verify and validate the events actually occurred and then give us a better indication of what we do about it. And we've also put decompression chambers, portable decompression chambers on our deployed carriers, so that if we do have an event, we don't take any added risk for our pilots going through any kind of physiological event.
Yeah, with that, I don't want to get into the details or contradict you too much, but my understanding is the PE rate on Growlers was going down, but we did see an upturn again last year. So maybe we can maybe you can send some folks over. We can get that.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Get that inconsistency settled. That'd be great. Since we at Naval Station Everett or Naval Air Station Woodby Island, we've home to the Growlers there. I'll just pick one of the services rather than have all of you discuss it. Maybe the Air Force on building and rebuilding the force. How are you? This is really more on the building the force and the area of cybersecurity, because we're really not rebuilding forces there. We're trying to build up the cadre. So how do you envision that balance between, say, active duty, reserve or National Guard, and use of private sector?
Well, we need to use...
And the personnel side.
Sure, we need to use all of it. I'll use an example. Recently, we had a guardsman in California who went to cyber training for the Air Force. He also happened to be a CEO of a cyber company. So we need to be able to tailor the continuum of training for the people. And we see it across our both Guard and Reserve. They got some really skilled people in the cyber area that we need to, they don't need to do a cookie cutter type training for somebody newly assessing in. So
do you have the flexibility in personnel systems in the Air Force to be able to do that, or do you feel stuck at all?
We're working through, we have, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but we're working through that to be able to provide that flexibility across, and specifically cyber security. And as General Allyn talked about today, as we look at what's happening in the world of software and how fast it's moving, we can't do acquisition speed to be able to, the current acquisition speed. So we're going to have to change that whole paradigm, as well as the people and how we train them. So we'll actually next month, we're having a big huddle at the Corona session to talk through just this subject on this continuation of training, on how we develop our Corps, and across all the 3 active Guard Reserve.
And for all the services, I'll follow up with all of you on that question about flexibility of personnel systems to address that. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's a good question. Dr. Desjardins.
Thank the Chairman. I thank all of you for being here today and answering our questions. And this can be for whoever wants to take it, but how have readiness shortfalls impacted operations with allies? In other words, related to joint exercise, defense cooperation agreements, and what our allies expect from our military on an international stage?
Well, I'll start and give these guys a break. You've been wearing out the Navy and the Air Force here the last few minutes, but we've had incredible opportunities to assure our allies, strengthen the capability and capacity of our allies, as well as increase the deterrent posture both in Europe and in the Pacific with exercise series that have been invaluable at a time when the capacity of each of these nations to be both a stable force in their own countries as well as contribute to regional solutions is part of how we deal with the extant threats that are there with a smaller military here in the United States. And I'll just highlight some of the work underway in Eastern Europe to strengthen that deterrent posture. We recently deployed 3rd Brigade, 4th Infantry Division that will start our heel-to-toe rotations of a constant Armor Brigade combat team presence in Eastern Europe. They began offloading ships just about 30 days ago. Within 14 days, they were on gunnery ranges and beginning to work with their Polish counterparts in the Zagan region of Poland. And today, elements of that unit are already forward in Estonia as a clear signature of our commitment to our NATO alliance and our ability to strengthen the capacity of the Baltic nations to deal with the instability that has been created with the aggression that Russia has exercised here in the last several years. So those are critical commitments. We could not have done it without the increased ERI funding that you provided us, and that funding is going to be critical in 2018 as well.
Okay. I guess, I mean, that's good to hear, but are there any rumblings in terms of our allies having concerns? What we're hearing today about our lack of readiness, does that give them trepidation as far as our ability to step up and honor our agreements?
Well, I'll first say for the Army, whenever we send a unit anywhere to meet a mission, they are trained and ready when they arrive. So no, they are not seeing this. What we're trying to describe to you is the readiness impact for the forces on the bench that should be ready to go for the unforeseen contingency.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what may be the most important topic of today, and that's our military men and women and what impact this readiness shortfall has on the personnel emotionally. I think anyone who signs up for any of the branch of the military understand the sacrifices they're going to make. They know they're going to miss Christmases, birthdays, anniversaries, T-ball games, basketball games, things like that. I mean, I don't think they go in there not knowing that. But with the high ops tempo of our smaller force, what is the impact on our staff sergeants and the morale of our troops?
Well, I'll start and then I'll pass to my Marine brother because it's something that we absolutely keep a pulse check on each and every day. The Sergeant Major of the Army travels across the Army every week to assess exactly the morale of our force and our ability to sustain this incredible all-volunteer force that we have built in the United States. And it's very inspiring to see the sustained commitment that our soldiers have. And I'll just give you one current example. You know, as part of this building toward the authorized strength that you've given us in this year's NDAA, we have to build about 28,000 additional soldiers in the total force. Within the first month of that effort, we had 2,500 soldiers raise their hand and say, "Hey, I want to continue to serve." Because the best way we deliver this capability at best dollar is to retain those that have already been trained and keep them in the force. and they're stepping up and saying, hey, I want to stay on this team. And we find that to be very encouraging.
Sir, I just have a little bit of time, but we're watching exactly what you're asking about. We see no issue with reenlistments after the first term of enlistment. I think we'll make our goal. But for the first time in this year, our challenge from getting that staff sergeant to reenlist right now, we're going to have to reenlist 87% of the remaining cohort to make our goal, and that might be challenging. So we're looking at incentives to that. That might be a leading indicator of the phenomenon you were describing, is that they're starting to feel a little stressed.
Okay. Well, I know I speak for all of us here. Our gratitude and appreciation for all you do and all our service men and women do is immense, and we greatly appreciate it. So thank you.
Ms. Murphy.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here and for your testimony today. I have two questions that I'll ask in succession and then leave you with the remainder of my allotted time to answer it. Admiral Moran, in January of 2016, the Navy put out a document called A Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority, which intends to guide the Navy's behavior and investments going forward. And it's built around four lines of effort: warfighting, learning faster, strengthening the Navy team, and building partnerships. And within the warfighting line of effort, the document notes the importance of developing concepts and capabilities to provide a range of options to national leaders, and then testing and refining those concepts through focused wargaming, modeling, and simulations. Also within the learning faster line of effort, there's a stated desire to expand the use of learning-centered technologies, simulation, and online gaming. I represent Florida's 7th District, which includes Naval Support Activity Orlando, which is home to a variety of government, private sector, and academic organizations, many of which specialize in high-tech R&D, modeling and simulation, and are known collectively as Team Orlando. Could you describe what investments the Navy will be making in support of modeling and simulation in fiscal year 2018 budget request, as well as in future budget requests? And to the other services, could you describe how modeling and simulation fits into your service training and readiness strategy? And then how do we ensure that the military services are acquiring state-of-the-art training equipment before that equipment becomes anything less than state-of-the-art? Put another way, is there a mismatch between the time it takes to acquire this modeling and simulation technology and the rapid pace at which the technology is evolving? And then my second line of questioning involves a recent article I read about an Associated Press examination into the effectiveness of DoD's program run out of CENTCOM to counter the online propaganda of ISIL. The investigation raised questions about whether DoD employees and contractors are sufficiently skilled in Arabic and adequately knowledgeable about Islam to serve as an effective counterweight to online recruiters seeking to radicalize young men and women throughout the Arab and Muslim world. Given the importance of this effort, what can we do to improve this?
Congressman, I'll start. I'll tackle the training piece here. I think I can speak for most everybody at the table. All of us are incredibly interested in this technology. Team Orlando is Army team, Navy team, Disney team, and the colleges and universities of that area, and they're a terrific team. I've been down there probably a half dozen times in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. The technology maturation that is finally coming to meet its promises there, and we are purposefully investing in that technology to try to take traditional paths of training out of schoolhouses, brick and mortar, and bring it to what we would call to the fleet, to the pier, to the flight line, where sailors are working on their gear, learning new gear, and being able to turn around training faster on their schedule when they learn at the right time. And that's what the technology really brings, is an ability for this generation to learn on equipment that they're used to seeing as they're growing up. So we're the ones that have to mature our own our training program. So that is actively going on. You heard earlier General Wilson talk about live virtual constructive. That is also a key component, because all of our weapon systems, the ranges of which we operate this gear now is extended well beyond the reach of some of our ranges out there. So this technology can bring that in closer. So to give others time to talk, I would leave it with you there. Everybody, especially on our side, we are actively investing because it is going to save us money in the long haul. Thank you.
And I'll just pile on, given that he highlighted the teamwork we have there in Orlando. The modeling and simulation live virtual constructive is basically the practice time that we spend hitting the sled before we ever take the field, right, for collective training. It's absolutely critical, particularly for our leaders, so that they get repetitions before you put the blood, sweat, and tears of our soldiers at risk in a venue that they may not be fully rehearsed in. So it's absolutely critical. And I'll cite one example. We are pursuing an upgrade to the Stryker vehicle specifically to deal with a capability gap in Eastern Europe. And in stride with fielding that new hardware, the new weapons platform, we are also pursuing a simulation trainer to enable us to get the repetitions on that combat vehicle before we ever roll it to the field. So it's done in stride. You talked about our ability to keep up with the rapid pace of modernization in modeling and simulation. Ours is less a problem with the capacity to do it than it is the funding. Like everything else, we've had to stretch out those program portfolios beyond what any of us are comfortable with within the funding constraints that we have.
Time generally has expired. Dr. Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and for the men and women behind you and all those that wear the uniform. Thanks for letting us sleep soundly at night and raising our children and grandchildren in a safe environment. Mr. Chairman, this committee knows the value of the B-52 bomber fleet. We in Louisiana are fortunate to have Barksdale, Fort Polk, the Joint Air Base at Belle Chase. The communities are very supportive. But this B-52 is 60 years old, expected to fly until 2050, and it has both nuclear and conventional missions that it is expected to fly. The Air Force, General Wilson, is considering a proposal to replace the engines on the B-52s, and it's my understanding that if we re-engine these B-52s, that it will increase their range by 30%, will increase their loitering time by 150%. And Mr. Chairman, I do have some slides that I would ask to be presented in the record, but just for future.
Objection.
And these major re-engine retoolings have, what I have seen, wonderful cost benefits, increases longevity, lowers maintenance costs. What is your take on this, General Wilson? And in particular, would you describe the proposal to pay for these engines with the third party, and what's your take on that?
Well, thanks for the question. I'm intimately familiar with this proposal. I think it makes great sense in a couple different areas. Operationally, as you pointed out, it makes great sense in terms of it increases both the range and the loiter capability of the B-52. From a business case, it seems to make sense. We save today's technology of engines will give you about a 30% efficiency than we had on the current TF-33 engine. So it's more efficient in terms of it costs less in terms to fly it. It costs less in terms of people because the current technology will put an engine on a wing and they won't take it off for 10,000 hours. There's a lot of manpower savings and time savings in keeping those engines updated and upgraded and running on the wing. So to me, it makes great sense. The question is, how do we pay for it? If we had it in our budget, we'd buy it, but we don't have it. So we looked at, are there creative ways we can do this through third-party financing, and a team's exploring just that and to see if we can, if it makes a business case through a third party to do it. But ultimately, I'd say if we had the money, we'd do it.
Does the airport support the third party way?
I haven't seen the specifics from the third party back on how we'll do that. We have a team in the Pentagon who are working that right now with the third-party finance folks to see how we'd bring that forward.
Okay, thank you. And one other question for you, General Wilson. Let me switch planes. I want to get your thoughts on the service life extension of the F-15. Where is that going? How's it being put out there? Is it going to work?
We don't know. We're going to do some modernization to our fourth-generation fighters. We have to, whether it be new radars or new equipment on it. Our F-15s are going to reach a point in the future where when structurally it's going to cost too much to maintain them, and we're looking for options to see how do we maintain or what are some other options to ensure we have the capacity of our fourth-generation fighter fleet going forward.
Yeah, I'm just afraid if we don't do something, we've got this critical gap that we've all alluded to this morning. And as we all know, the active guard reserve, everybody depends on this F-15 aircraft as a strike fighter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your extraordinary service to our country and to each and every one of you. General Petraeus was here last week, and 6 months ago, in the Wall Street Journal, he penned an op-ed in which he said, "There is no crisis in military readiness." In fact, he said, "The current national defense budget of over $600 billion a year far exceeds the Cold War average of about $525 billion adjusted for inflation." Assuming no return to sequestration as occurred in 2013, the Pentagon budgets to buy equipment now exceeds $100 billion a year, a healthy and sustainable level. The so-called procurement holiday of the 90s and early 2000s is over. So, on the one hand, you're making statements about readiness. I realize that General Petraeus is no longer in service, but he suggests that we have enough money. What would be your comment to that, General Allyn?
Thank you, Congresswoman Spear, for the opportunity to answer a great question. And I can only say the facts as they affect the United States Army. Our modernization budget, which is how we build future readiness against the forces we will face in the future, is 50% of what it was in 2009. In FY17, it's $24.8 billion. It was $45.5 billion in 2009. So what that means is we have significantly attrited the building of future readiness against the likely threats that we will face. And in terms of near-term readiness, there is a significant challenge in meeting not only the current operational tempo with training-ready forces, but having sufficient forces ready to deploy in the event of an unforeseen contingency. So that's what we owe the country.
So you dispute what General Petraeus says?
They don't match the facts as I see them affecting the United States Army's readiness.
All right. I think maybe more than one of you referenced the base inventory surplus of some 25%, which is a mind-boggling number. For each of you, would you tell us what that means in costs we are putting out for surplus bases?
I'll start with part of it. So today, we maintain our facilities at a rate of 1.5% recapitalization. So said another way, it takes 129 years to recapitalize our bases. We have a $25 billion backlog of modernization projects across our bases. We could smartly reduce the infrastructure, target where it would be needed going forward, and be able to invest that money into future facilities. Today, in terms of MILCON constructions at our bases, we only fund new mission or those that directly support the COCOM's combatant commanders' needs. We have lots of places, whether it be dorms or child care, education centers, gymnasiums that are not where they need to be in terms of facilities, but yet we maintain those facilities across too many bases, and we think we can reduce some of that. The largest BRAC in the past has reduced infrastructure about 5%. We think it's worth looking at to be able to target the investment to put elsewhere in these challenging budget conditions.
So I would like to work with you on this. I mean, this is a hot potato for this committee. No one wants to see bases closed, but we have a certain pot of money, and we've got to use it smartly. And we're spending more money than China and Russia combined on our military, and I'd suggest that there's got to be a smarter way that we spend it. So I would look forward to working with you on that. A question about women in combat positions. A 3-year study has opened up about 213,000 positions to women in combat if they meet the standards. It appears, or we're hearing rumblings, that the administration now, through Secretary Mattis and Chairman Dunford, are talking about reviewing, revising, or repealing this policy. I'd like your comments on that. Do you know about any efforts to do that? And doesn't that kind of fly in the face of having the ready workforce we need if you're excluding women who are capable to engage in combat?
There's been no conversation in the Pentagon about reviewing, revising the commitment that's been made to gender integration, and we're all achieving higher levels of readiness now that we are opening it up to 100% of the population of America to be able to contribute.
If the rest of you could just respond for the record, thank you.
If the gentlelady from Arizona will permit me, I wanted to give the other witnesses a chance to answer Ms. Spears' first question, and that is, aren't we spending enough money? General Allyn compared what we're doing now with what we were doing in 2009, but how would the other three of you respond to her question? Admiral?
Well, I completely agree with how General Allyn described his answer, which was the facts speak largely towards a Navy that is too small, and that size has caused us to be less ready because we're driving the small force harder than we ever have. And if that continues, we're eventually going to spiral down where we don't have enough ships to operate in the parts of the world where the nation expects us to be. So we are on a clear path to not having enough capacity to answer the call anywhere in the world.
Chairman, I'd say the same thing for the Air Force. We're too small for what the nation requires of our Air Force. We're fully ready and have shown repeatedly that we can fight today's fight against a violent extremist organization. Against a high-end adversary, we lack the capacity and the numbers that are full spectrum ready to be able to perform without significant risk against a high-end adversary. So I would disagree with General Petraeus and say that we're ready today.
And Congresswoman, General Petraeus is one of our best military minds. What I don't know what was in the editorial, and I haven't read it, but you threw two numbers out, 525 with constant year dollars against 600 billion this year in a defense budget. I don't know what year the Cold War was, but there's a few things that happened during the Cold War. One was we went to an all-volunteer force, so it's true that we spend more money on our enlisted and officers now than we did in the Cold War. So I would have to dig through that. So I can't make a comparison. If that's the gross level of comparison, $100 billion in modernization, we used to modernize at about $4 billion a year a decade ago. We just crested the $1.5 billion mark per year. That's all we spend out of a $24 billion budget. It's about 7%. It ought to be about 15%. I don't know any large organization that does not recapitalize its capital infrastructure at less than a 15% annum rate. So there's an apples and apples here somewhere, but I think the discussion is an apples and oranges right now, ma'am.
Well, fair point. We don't know the context, but I just thought everybody ought to have a chance to answer the general question. I appreciate the gentlelady's patience. Ms. McSally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Wilson, your testimony and the discussion today about pilot shortage and readiness has been very important. I remember as a young officer us making fun of our Soviet counterparts who didn't have the money to get the training hours so that they were practicing their maneuvers on sticks. Now it seems like we're in the situation where our guys and gals are not flying what they need in order to stay ready. So we've heard a lot about that today, but can you compare with what we know about how that compares to Russia and China and what their pilots are getting?
I can't specifically speak on what Russia and China are doing. I would say that today in our combat air forces, we're flying less hours and sorties than we were at the bottom of the Hollow Force in the late 70s. Yeah. And we need to turn that around.
Is it possible to hear back for the record what we know or the assessment or from appropriate agencies on the comparison, because that's obviously of deep concern to us.
We will do that.
Additionally, the fighter pilot shortage we're very aware of. I have good friends that are moving out. There's push-pull factors, as you know, morale and mission focus and the ability to do their job in the military, plus the airlines are hiring. We've got the numbers on the record. Are there creative solutions being discussed where it's not just a win-lose between us and the airlines, but a win-win to include leaves of absence or gray-beard programs, or those that I know many who left for the airlines and they would love to come back for maybe 2 or 3 years and be a part of the mission again, but then be willing, be able to go back. What sort of creative solutions are you discussing? So this isn't just a one small pie being in a win-lose situation.
Yeah, Congressman, that's exactly what we're looking at. We're looking at any and all those options to make this a win-win. As we mentioned earlier, the airlines are hiring 4,000 a year. We're producing amongst all three of us about 2,000 a year. So we've got to find creative ways to do it differently. Whether people can take leave of absences and come back, whether we can seamlessly transition between active guard, reserve, civilian airlines and be able to do that, we're looking at any and all options.
Great, thanks. And similarly on the maintenance front, we've got 3,500 short in maintenance, but while you were downsizing, you pushed thousands of maintenance guys out. Some of them didn't want to leave. Are we reaching back to them? Instead of having to train new people out of basic training, bring back those who left at 6 years, 10 years, 12 years. Give them the option to come back in so that we're bringing that experience back.
Yes, that's being looked at also.
Great, thank you. General Allyn, Fort Huachuca is in my district. A lot of discussion today about readiness of the conventional force, brigade, combat teams, which are important. But we also have asymmetrical capabilities like electronic warfare, intel, others. Can you talk about our readiness specifically of EW, say, and some of these other asymmetrical areas that don't get the same amount of attention?
Well, thank you, ma'am, and they are getting a significant amount of attention from us. We recognize the capability, the gap that we have, particularly in electronic warfare, in cyber, and across the electromagnetic spectrum. And we have a number of projects underway, both to address the high technology gaps that exist for the long term, and fielding capabilities that enable us to operate more effectively, both offensively and defensively, as well as operations at the brigade level and below, which is the most pressing current gap we have tactically. As you know, the Russians employ this capability in an integrated manner inside very tactical-sized units. We have historically kept that at echelons above division, and so we are looking at how to better integrate this capability to enable us to dominate, if necessary, against near-peer competitors, where we know that we will face a very congested cyberspace environment.
Great, thanks. General Wilson, back to you. In some of the discussions I've had with those that are still active duty, the squadron I commanded had 24 aircraft assigned. Most of them are down to 18, but we're deploying 12 usually is the model. Those that stay behind are having a hard time, doing a two-turn two. Sorry to get so specific here, but it's just looking at it from my experience, it seems like that may be exacerbating some of the readiness challenges for the small package that's left behind. Are you looking at plussing up to 24 PAA in order to have a better balance to address some of these readiness issues?
We are looking at how we get the right force presentation construct to go forward, what the size of the squadrons are. As you know, the Chief of Staff has got 3 big efforts underway. One is reinvigorating the squadron to bring that's where the warfighting happens, that's where the culture happens, that's how we build and maintain our Air Force. So across the Air Force, that's one of the main efforts. The next one is how do we build joint leaders and teams going forward in the future. And the third one is on multi-domain command and control. All 3 efforts are really important. And as one of those, there will be a force sizing construct of what should a squadron look like in the future.
Great. And, if you need any retired hog drivers to come back and fly a little bit on the weekends, I'm happy to volunteer. All right, thanks you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Oh, we might have to put a stop to that. Gentleman from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for your testimony today, most especially for your service to our nation, and, of course, the men and women under your command for their service as well. So to all of our witnesses over the past year or so, a persistent theme within the Armed Services Committee has been that of military readiness, and certainly we've discussed many ways by which to increase support and resources to the Department of Defense, yet Congress has not taken any lasting steps to reverse sequestration in order to meet these goals. CNO Richardson stated to this committee last March, in fact, that the ability to do maintenance on our ships was severely affected by sequestration. It incurred a readiness debt. So I know that this topic has been covered several times already this morning, so I'm going to move on to another question, but I'd just like to echo my colleagues' comments and note that sequestration really must be repealed. I'm certainly looking for ways that we can do that. So let me move on to another topic, though, important to national security. This is for all of our witnesses. Ensuring that the U.S. military can operate effectively across all domains, including cyberspace, one of my top priorities. This necessitates training and equipping our servicemen and women in cyberspace, which can be both costly and time-consuming, understandably. But once we've trained these operators in cyberspace, how are you ensuring that they continue on this career path within the military, and how is each of your services recruiting and retaining these superior cyber warriors?
Well, I'll start and we'll roll down the table here as quickly as we can, Congressman. Thanks for that question. It's absolutely been a focus for all of our services is how do you ensure you have the flexible retention policies in place to sustain these great professionals once we have them trained up. I think you know it takes 18 to 24 months to train a fully trained multi-domain cyber warrior. And once we get them trained, we have to be able to sustain their presence in our force to be effective in the future battlefield. One insight I'll offer to you, a vignette from a visit I had with some of our cyber warriors this past year. I asked exactly that question. What were we going to need to do to keep you in the force? And the response of one of our staff sergeants was, "Sir, if I tried to do this in the outside, I'd get arrested." And so the mission that we provide them, the opportunity they have to contribute in this domain to national security is actually very, very attractive for them. But we must continue to watch to ensure that we both continue to assess and retain them as we move forward.
Thank you, General.
Yeah, I would just add, Congressman, that the beauty of our services is that young men and women join because they want to serve. And as long as we provide them that opportunity, whether it's at the high end of things that they wouldn't be allowed to do outside the service, and continue to provide them with the right compensation, we're going to be able to keep those that we need to keep. But we're also looking at other ways to keep them interested by ensuring that they're having the most modern training, the most modern education and capability training that they can get. Some of that involves allowing them to take time to go work in industries where these new technologies are being advanced and bring them back into the Navy and other services. And other ways are to be able to laterally bring people from industry and the commercial sector who also want to serve, an opportunity to laterally move into the services and be able to go in and out. So some of the authorities we've asked for in legislation have been towards this end, the ability to move people freely between what the civilian market does and what we do for service.
And on that point, Admiral, I just mentioned that I authored the provision along with the support with the chairman that brought down a lot of those barriers that allowed us to bring up in private sector talent for a period of time, and same thing allow our men and women in uniform to also for a period of time be in the private sector to learn best practices and up-to-date skills there. So I agree with you on that.
Thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I'd make it real quick is to say, you know, we're blessed and we get the best and brightest young people America has to offer to join our services. So we start with good people, we get them the right education, training, experience, we make sure they're confident and proud of what they do and personally, professionally fulfilled. And we got efforts in all those little boxes to make sure we're doing that smartly and rightly. And how do we partner with our civilian partners to make sure that personally and professionally fulfilled, to retain them over time is important.
I'm with them, sir.
Thank you, General. I just hope that just in closing it that we're also maintaining the career path for them to be able to advance in their careers to the next ranks, while at the same time keeping them in this highly in demand field. Because cyber's not going away anytime soon. So thank you all, and I yield back.
And just piggybacking on Mr. Langevin's point, and Ms. McSally's point about bringing in maintainers laterally or something. I mean, I trust y'all are all looking at these authorities for bringing in folks and also for their promotion, their career track, what happens then. Certainly, it's something that we are interested in assisting you with if some change in statute or some sort of authority, and I'm going to trust y'all as you look at it to let us know what you find, whether it's cyber or these other areas. I just want to touch on a couple things right quick. Admiral Moran already answered the question, what happens without a supplemental this year? He said they got to decommission air wings, et cetera. Have the others of you looked at what you would have to do if there is no supplemental and funding is flat for the remainder of the fiscal year?
I'll start. Well, Chairman, as we've looked at this, a year-long CR puts us into sequestration-type actions. To make up a $1.5 billion shortfall right now, the only place we can go is our readiness accounts. So we'd have to go after flying hours, WSS, FRSM. It would have a dramatic impact on us, so that's why it's really important that we get an appropriations bill.
Sir, for us, the shining example is we would stop flying in about July.
Completely?
Yes, sir. Caveated by the guys that are forward will still fly. All the flying back in the continental United States, all the training would cease without the supplemental, and that includes the parts money and the flying hour money. That's what happened to us.
And Chairman, for the United States Army, the increased authorization to a active force of 476,000, a total force of 1.018 million. Without the funding for that increase, we would set the conditions for a hollow force, which is absolutely unacceptable. And it will be felt by those forces preparing to deploy, because as with the Marine Corps, we will continue to deliver training-ready forces for the known demands that we have. But our bench will be repleted, and our equipment, training, and personnel readiness will all begin to suffer.
Thank you. Admiral, we made brief reference, but we really haven't talked about carrier gap today. We've talked a lot about readiness, but there's also the issue of whether we can be where we need to be when we need to be there. And I don't know how much detail you can get into in this forum, but can you describe briefly the concern about not having a carrier in key theaters at some points?
Yes, sir. I'll use what I believe is a great example. A couple years ago, when you recall, ISIS took a bunch of Yazidis and hostage on a hilltop in northern Iraq, and National Command Authority wanted to be able to go push back that force. At the time, just based on agreements with partners in the region, the aircraft carrier and its component air wing and support ships was the only force really that was able to provide that top cover for about 54 consecutive days. The fact that we were there as part of a normal rotation allowed for that contingency. So every time you take a gap in areas where we've got troops on the ground, we've got combat ongoing, and you don't have that capability at sea, in the Gulf, Eastern Med, South China Sea, and something erupts, we're not going to get there in time to go back to the original discussion. So the idea of our global presence is to be there when things do erupt and try to prevent things from happening in the first place.
But it is true, is it not, that in recent years we have had what we call a carrier gap, where we have not had a carrier, for example, in the Persian Gulf or in other key places around the world?
Yes, sir, that is true. As recent as just the last few months, when Ike returned home and Bush was late, as we talked about earlier, Bush was late getting out of the yards. We chose to bring Ike back at her 7-month point so we could get her back in the maintenance lineup. Now, that was all done jointly with the Joint Staff, but clearly for that period of time, there was no carrier in the Gulf.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you all. I am struck, and I don't remember which one of you made this comment, but one of the service chiefs in a meeting with the committee last year said the price for a lack of readiness is higher casualties. One of you mentioned that earlier today. I made some offhanded reference to the Super Bowl about if you don't get to practice and then you go play the Super Bowl. The difference in this Super Bowl is there are lives at stake. And I know y'all are acutely aware of that. I think members of the committee are. But it just adds a sense of importance and urgency to our joint work to get these problems fixed that we have identified today. Y'all have been helpful. Thank you for being here. The hearing stands adjourned.